first bill on the calendar for the day is House File 601. The clerk will report the bill.
House File number 601, number 6 on the calendar for the day, an act relating to public safety requiring lost and stolen firearms to be reported promptly. Second engrossment.
I recognize the member from Ramsey, Representative Herr, to explain the bill.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This bill is actually a quite simple bill. It is a bill that requires private gun owners to report lost or theft of a firearm possession to law enforcement as soon as possible or no later than 48 hours from when they knew or reasonably should have known of the lost or theft. Under this bill, a gun owner who fails to report a lost or stolen firearm is guilty of a petty misdemeanor for their first offense, a misdemeanor for their second, and a gross misdemeanor for any further offenses. A gun owner who complies with the bill's recording requirement is immune from prosecution for violating any gun storage laws in relation to the lost or theft. That is the summary of the bill, Madam Speaker.
There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Engen moves to amend House File number 601, the second engrossment. The amendment is coded DE1.
The member from Anoka, Representative Engen, to your amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, members. The premise of House File 601 as it currently stands, it presumes that the epidemic of gun violence that's plaguing Minnesota right now should be attributed to somehow otherwise law-abiding gun owners. And, that's wrong. That's extremely disingenuous to just assume that without knowing it and having the evidence to back it up. So, while it's refreshing and reassuring to see that the majority party is now, they're going to acknowledge the dangerous and seriousness of burglary again, it's disheartening to see them attempt to criminalize the folks who are the victim of a burglary rather than those who are committing it in the first place. But anyways, my amendment simply replaces the current language of the bill with the opportunity to comprise a task force of both law enforcement representatives and prosecutors to study and report back to us, the legislature, of the best means to go after the amount of guns or the extent of which gun thievery is leading to gun crimes in the first place. And that way we can take a scalpel approach to this rather than a sledgehammer. I request your support and would ask for a roll call.
Representative Engen requests a roll call. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Discussion to the amendment. Representative Herr.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And Representative Engen, thank you for bringing this amendment forward. Unfortunately, I'm going to ask for a no vote for this amendment. This amendment deletes actually the entire bill and it establishes this task force. It's unfortunate that maybe my colleagues across the aisle are unaware that there already is data and statistics around lost and stolen firearms. Though we do not require reporting, we do know that lost and stolen firearms do end up in the illegal gun markets. We also know that it is an appealing source of firearm for people who are legally prohibited from owning guns, such as in straw purchase situations. And one study found that crime guns originating in states with a lost or stolen reporting law were 30% less likely to end up in another state than guns that came from states without such law. So we don't need a study. Just ask for members to vote no.
The member from Morrison, Representative Schultz.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Representative Engen, for bringing this amendment. I think that more information and more data is super helpful for us. In addition, what I know is we have several members of this body who love the data, who love the science, who love the facts and the figures. And so I wanted to ask, would Representative Hemmingson-Yager yield?
She will not. Representative Schultz.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This amendment that Representative Engen brought today is all about creating a task force and understanding the data. And so we just heard a moment ago that Representative Herr stated that there is data to this effect. And certainly I think that that would have been helpful for our discussion today to determine exactly if the data suggests that we need to be taking an action like this underlying bill that criminalizes law-abiding gun owners. That's the question before us, right? And when we're considering the actions that are taking place in Minnesota and the amount of theft and burglary happening in Minnesota, I think the facts, the figures, the data, the science are something that I know that my colleague on the other side of the aisle, Representative Hemmingson-Yager, really appreciates and is fantastic at getting. And so I think that when we're thinking about Representative Engen's amendment, it's a big reason why we need to ensure that we adopt this for the purpose of having the data. Because before us today, there hasn't been the information provided to this chamber in the form of data or statistics to support the underlying bill, which is why I believe that we should adopt Representative Engin's amendment to ensure that we aren't passing more irresponsible legislation that makes victims of law-abiding gun owners. Thank you.
I would just remind members that the issue before the body is the legislation, and bringing up particular personalities is prohibited by Mason's Manual, Section 124. Personalities not permitted in debate. The member from Sherburne, Representative Novotny.
Madam Chair, I'd just like to thank Representative Engin for bringing this forward. I agree with what Representative Schultz said about this being a really good bill, and I'm kind of confused by the point that the speaker made there, how I'm supposed to steer my language around this. But my question would be, if we have this data that's available to us, how come none of that was brought to the Public Safety Committee or made available to us? I would really like to have that information. I've said several times on different bills where we want the information. In the bill that's coming up for Representative Berg, I think it's a great bill. Why are we doing in the next bill or one of the bills that we're going to be hearing shortly where we're studying this if we have that information? I'm confused. If it's there, please make it available to us. And if you've seen this information, Representative Herr, would you yield for a question?
She will yield for a question. Representative Novotny.
Representative Herr, what percentage of guns used in crimes are lost or stolen and haven't been reported?
Representative Herr.
Madam Speaker, Representative Novotny. So what I can share with you is that the reason why I just assume that since we are all legislators, we do our homework, and all the data that I have in front of me is actually public and is available to all of you as well. So since we all care about gun violence and curbing the gun violence that we have seen within our communities, I just expect that this issue is top of mind for all of us. And so the data is actually public data. What I can share with you is that in a 2017 study by the National Library of Medicine, estimated 380,000 guns are stolen in the United States each year, equivalent to one every 90 seconds. That according to the FBI, an estimated 1.8 million guns were stolen in the United States between 2012 and 2017, with more than 11,000 of those firearms being stolen in Minnesota. What I can share with you is that there were 513 firearm-related deaths in Minnesota in 2020. The death rate is 8.9 per 100,000 people. Of these deaths, 354, or 69%, were suicides, and 138, or 27%, were homicides. The majority of them were male, and the death rate was 15.9 per 100,000 for males and 2 per 100,000 for females. There's a lot of data out there regarding the gun violence that is being experienced by our communities. There is a lot of information that is being reported, and this is just information that's being reported that is not being required to be reported. The only way that we will actually get a hand on how much of lost and stolen is out there is if we actually have a database in which our law enforcement will actually do that, so that we can track what is being lost, what is being stolen, and how those guns are being used. You can't do that with the task force, but you can do that if we go ahead and create the supplemental, which would have been a part of the cost in this bill in order to collect this data.
Representative Novotny.
And I guess, thank you, Madam Chair. I guess I wouldn't consider that to be a questioning of my character, that I didn't do the research, because that's not the research I was asking about, Representative Herr. The research that I was asking for is, what would your bill fix? You cited a bunch of statistics of firearms being stolen. You cited the use of firearms in crimes, and I would admit to you that most of those crimes are committed in a very, very small percentage of this state, geographically. So my question to you is, how does your bill fix? How many cases would it have fixed? We don't know that, do we? You cited statistics, nationwide statistics. For background, I will tell you that any time a gun is found at a crime scene or confiscated in a stolen car or found in a ditch, that gun is immediately or within a day or two run through E-Trace, which means whichever agency is controlling this evidence, they're going to go in, they're going to check the ATF records, and they're going to find when the last legal transfer of this firearm took place. I submit to you, Representative Herr, that somewhere in the state, I would suspect somewhere in the Attorney General's office, has a very good idea where these guns are coming from. Just as I do, because I did do my research. And one of the things I found is part of the problem, and this addresses several of the cases that we're going to hear, or the bills that we're going to hear today. There was recently a person from Minneapolis sentenced to prison for possession of a machine gun. And by that I mean they were sentenced to federal prison, because that's the only way you're going to go to prison in this state for having a machine gun. How do I know that? Because the same person earlier, less than a year before, had been arrested for firearms violation. Got another person that was arrested with a machine gun. I assume it was probably a switch. For those of you who don't know, a switch is a device, an auto sear that's added illegally to a firearm. We've got multiple cases. This person, who is a felon with a record, caught with a switch, was in custody one day. That's the day he was booked. One day for possession of a firearm that he wasn't supposed to have and was illegally converted. Going back to my original one, in my research that I was doing in this bill, this individual was also caught with an auto sear. And this is multiple times that he had been handled. Okay, so we got one day, long enough to be bailed out. No bail. And when they went to pick him up again, and they did a search on his house, he had a gun that had the auto sear, and it was on a ghost gun. A ghost gun is a gun that has been manufactured privately, and there's no serial number on it. So that is why I want to know what problem we're trying to fix before we just randomly do a bill because other states have done it too. Instead of just blindly going through like a bull in a tea shop or china shop, that we know what we're doing as opposed to just swinging blindly. As I mentioned in Ways and Means, Representative Herr, you brought 601 and made a big deal about that in a press conference, that this is going to be our response to the Burnsville tragedy. Until we found out that the Burnsville tragedy had nothing to do with your bill. So we're not fixing that. What are we fixing? So I'll ask you again, Representative Herr, do you have any specific numbers that address your bill that you could make available to me?
She will yield. Representative Herr.
And Madam Speaker, I'm going to actually stick to the amendment that is before us. And the amendment before us is actually asking us to set a task force up for lost or stolen firearms. And what I want to be very clear about is a task force does not collect data. Our bill, in asking what your Representative Novotny is asking for, is that the 601 bill would actually create a supplemental report in the NIBR system in which BCA collects all of the gun data and information regarding lost or stolen. It would put it in the system and we could collect it, then we can actually do something with that information. I don't know how I could be any more clear about the underlying bill in which that it will help prevent uses for straw purchasing and also in addition to the guns making it into the illegal gun market. What I can also say is that we do not have a place to record this information. Sure, when law enforcement comes upon a gun, I'm sure that there's a way for them to handle that information. What I can tell you is I had a constituent call me frantic, saying his gun was stolen. He had called the law enforcement and asked and told them he wanted to report his firearm missing, that it had been stolen. And they told him there was nowhere to report that. So if we are not collecting data, if we are not collecting the information, we cannot then decide what happens with that data. So to stick to what is in front of us, which is the Engen amendment that states that, that to delete the underlying bill and insert language for a task force, it does not achieve what Representative Novotny is looking for either. And so if we want data, then let's collect the data through the lost and stolen firearm bill.
Representative Novotny.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Contrary to what my wife says, I do not have too many guns. I do need more safes. And I don't know who you talked to, Representative Herr, about not being able to report a lost or stolen firearm. That's just wrong. And I'll say that because there may or may not have been a time when I misplaced a firearm and reported it to my local police department, because the last thing I wanted to have happen is that firearm show up at a crime scene and have it come back to me without a reasonable explanation, like I think most reasonable, law-abiding gun owners would do. Would Representative Johnson yield for a question?
He will yield. Representative Novotny.
Representative Johnson, have you ever taken a report of a lost or stolen firearm for someone that was concerned, a law-abiding, reasonable member of the public?
The member for Mysanti, Representative Johnson.
Madam Speaker, members, Representative Novotny, I've taken numerous reports of lost or stolen firearms. The way it works is we take the report, we get a description, make, model, serial number of the firearm that's missing or stolen, and we actually entered into the computer, statewide computer, actually nationwide, for anything that's stolen property. And when we find firearms that, in fact, I've recovered numerous stolen firearms because we have that serial number that's reported in the state computer when you verify it with the agency that reported it. And the person that has it is then arrested for possession of stolen property, and hopefully he'll tell us where he was able to obtain that firearm so we can go after the people who actually did the burglary or the theft.
Representative Novotny.
Thank you, Representative Johnson. We could go around the chamber here and ask other members of law enforcement that have been in the business for a while if that was any different, but I can tell you that the answer is going to be the same. There is a process for reporting lost or stolen firearms. If there wasn't, Representative Herr wouldn't be able to cite the numbers of the national statistics that she did. I'm happy to report that there's also a process for when you find your firearm in a safe that you didn't think you put it in, that you can call your police department and say, please rescind my report, because I don't want to then be in a situation where that shows up that I've got it and it comes up as a lost or stolen firearm, even if it's mine. This amendment by Representative Engen is a very good idea. I can't think of anything else where we would just blindly go ahead and do a bill to solve a problem that we don't know what it is. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Discussion. The member from Traverse, Representative Backer.
Yeah, Madam Speaker, thank you. You know, I would want to, first of all, say task force matters. And thanks to Speaker Hortman, Representative Hewitt, and I served on an EMS task force. We went across the state, held meetings in regards with what is happening in greater Minnesota for rural EMS. And that's what task force do, is they look at a particular problem, look at possible solutions, pros and cons, risks, and so forth. And that's why this amendment makes sense. We did it for EMS. We've done it many times since this. I've been here for now 10 years. We've done quite a few task force. So thank you. This is a smart amendment, because just collecting data itself doesn't do anything. Representative Hewitt and I saw that out in rural Minnesota, looking at EMS. You got to look at what's the potential outcome. So thank you for this amendment. I would ask for a green vote for this task force. Thank you, members.
The member from Carver, Representative Nash.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, let's look at the Engen amendment a little closer, starting on lines 2.6 through 2.18. It says the duties of the task force shall, at a minimum, study the number of firearms used in crimes. So we're going to study that, and in order to study the number of firearms used in the commission of a crime, you're going to have to collect some data. So the author of the underlying bill is not exactly accurate in saying that it won't create any data. Lines 2.8 says reported as having been stolen and not being reported. Those are creation of data also. So here's what I know. Having served on a task force, the governor's Blue Ribbon Task Force on IT modernization and cybersecurity, we came together, first, study the problem. Let's make sure that we don't run towards something rashly. Let's study the problem. Let's collect data. Let's make sure that the things that we think are a problem are actually, a problem. So in doing so, in the task force that Representative Engen's amendment would allow for, we are collecting data. And the best part of his amendment says that the task force, in lines 2.11, the task force may make recommendations for proposed legislation or policies related to the reporting of lost or stolen firearms. That's important to note. They're going to study the problem, they're going to collect data on the problem, they're going to talk about it with experts like Representative Novotny or Representative Whitty or Representative Johnson or anyone who's been in law enforcement. They're going to ask pointed questions, they're going to get blunt answers back. They're going to sit there and talk about, okay, how do we craft policy that will best address the problem at hand, not after a tragedy over a weekend where we lost 3 members of our first responders team, rashly move forward with a bill that says, ooh, let's fix a problem that we, can't define. Because that's what this is doing. So a wise legislator, I was taught when I got here, a wise legislator is going to gather as much information as they possibly can before they rush towards creating a solution for something that they yet can't get their arms around. Now, like Representative Novotny, I don't have too many. I'm running short on safes, and we'll talk about this in third reading, I think that the problem here is that you're trying to solve something that you don't possibly truly understand in totality. Yes, we want to make sure that lost or stolen guns are reported. That is something that we should all agree on. However, this doesn't make any sense, and there are other problems in the bill that we'll talk about during third reading, but Representative Engen's amendment is a good step forward to say, let's understand the problem, not just pull a solution out of thin air and hope, much like the monkey house illustration, that we're going to throw enough stuff against the wall and maybe some of it will stick. The Engen Amendment provides actionable data acquired through people who are informed and understand what data will mean, as opposed to just this bill. It's a short bill, but it does way more than I think people realize. The Engen Amendment is a good step forward. And I think what you might find as a result of the task force is that many of the preconceived notions that you have around this are not true. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The member from Wright, Representative Hudson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, Representative Engen, for bringing this amendment. Representative Herr, as I heard you appeal to the language in your underlying bill as the mechanism for collecting data that we'll be able to utilize in order to determine what the problem is, it sounded an awful lot like you were suggesting that we need to pass the underlying bill in order to find out why we need it, which is a bizarre premise, if not oddly familiar. As pointed out by my colleague, Representative Nash, again, looking at lines 2.6 through 2.10, the task force shall, at a minimum, study the number of firearms used in crimes that were either reported as having been lost or stolen, or not reported as having been lost or stolen, but were later found to have been stolen. If we're going to, I think the context that's missing in this discussion surrounding the amendment and recognizing that we're supposed to speak to the amendment, it is to an underlying bill. I think it's appropriate to speak to what the underlying bill does. What it does is it criminalizes being a victim of firearm theft. That's what it does, in effect. It says that under circumstances where you didn't know that you were the victim of a theft, but some prosecutor somewhere thinks you reasonably should have, according to their arbitrary definition, we're going to charge you with a crime for having been a victim. I think before we take that drastic step, if we're recognizing, which it sounds like we are, that there's data that is vital to understanding why we would take that step, we collect that data beforehand with the task force, as opposed to passing a bill that provides criminal penalty for having been victimized and then hoping that we get the data on the back end. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The member from Ramsey, Representative Pinto.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Speaker, I want to recognize and hope that we all can recognize something that we all share. I heard this spoken by a GOP colleague just a minute ago, that we should make sure that lost or stolen guns are reported. Like, that is a goal that we all should share. That is a goal that we do share. The problem with the amendment, of course, is that it would stop that from happening. It would gut the underlying bill, which has a very straightforward way of making sure that lost or stolen guns are reported, which is to require the reporting of lost or stolen guns. That's what Representative Herr's bill does. What the amendment would do is to gut that in place of this task force. Members, we need to remember that when it comes to finding a gun later on that's used in a crime, there was a comment about how you'd hate to have that be something that, the reason that somebody would report up front is because when that gun is found in a crime later, you'd hate to have it be that you wouldn't have a reasonable explanation as to how your gun ended up at the crime. Well, unfortunately right now, the explanation you can give is, oh, that was lost years ago. That was stolen years ago. The point of the bill and what the amendment would gut is to take away that opportunity to say years later to make some sort of claim. The idea is this is behavior that responsible gun owners already do, apparently based on the comments of my GOP colleagues. We want to make sure that all gun owners live up to that same level of responsibility. The amendment, the bill, pardon me, establishes a petty misdemeanor, simply recognizing this is a standard that needs to be addressed. And what the amendment would do is to gut that. Members, if we all agree that lost or stolen guns should be reported, there's a straightforward way to have that happen, which is to require that they be reported. The amendment would gut that. Please vote it down. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Further discussion on the Engen amendment. Seeing none, the clerk will take the roll. Will the chief clerk please call the names of the members who are voting remotely?
Becker Finn.
Becker Finn, no.
Becker Finn, no. Carroll.
Carroll, no.
Carroll, no. Cagle.
Go ahead.
Cagle, no.
Cagle, no. Vang.
Vang, no.
Vang, no.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 63 ayes and 68 nays, the motion does not prevail. The amendment is not adopted. There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Hudson moves to amend House File Number 601, the second engrossment. The amendment is coded DE2.
The member from Wright, Representative Hudson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, the DE2 tries to solve this problem from the side of the equation that we ought to be targeting, and that's the actual criminal, the actual person who engages in the theft and then turns around and uses that weapon to engage in further crime. What the amendment would do is it would provide that a person who possesses a firearm that belongs to another without claim of right or the other's consent is guilty of a gross misdemeanor if the firearm was reported as having been lost or stolen, or if it is found to have been stolen. And it's not going to prevent any other conviction for any other crime that may have been committed by the perpetrator so found to be in possession of a stolen firearm. We'll get into talking about this, I'm sure, more on third reading. But again, as stated in the discussion over the previous amendment, the Ingen Amendment, our focus really ought to be on the actual criminals, the people who take affirmative action to encroach upon the rights and the liberty and the life of innocent Minnesotans. We should not be punishing law-abiding gun owners for being the victim of a crime. And so I hope that we can get support for this amendment and focus our attention on those who are actually engaging with criminal intent. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Discussion on the Hudson Amendment. Representative Herr.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And just to speak to this DE2 amendment, I'm a little perplexed by this amendment because under statute 609.52, it's the statute covering theft, specifically as it relates to firearm in subdivision 3. The sentence for this is already imprisonment of not more than 20 years or payment of $100,000 or both. This amendment actually creates a lesser punishment for this, so please vote no on the amendment.
Discussion on the amendment. Any further discussion? Representative Hudson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would request a roll call on this amendment, please.
Representative Hudson requests a roll call. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Representative Hudson.
Well, you'll have to forgive me for not noticing, seeing as how we seem incapable of enforcing our gun laws against criminals who act with criminal intent, against people who are innocent. We need to send the signal that we are not going to criminalize innocent people who are victimized while they watch as those who perpetrate against them are continually allowed to get away with it. That's the status quo in the state of Minnesota. Madam Speaker, I would ask members to vote yes.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, the clerk will take the roll on the amendment. Will the clerk please call the names of the members who are voting remotely?
Becker Finn.
Becker Finn, no.
Becker Finn, no. Carroll.
There you go.
Carroll, no.
Carroll, no. Cagle.
Cagle, no.
Cagle, no. Vang.
Vang, no.
Vang, no.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 63 ayes and 68 nays, the motion does not prevail. The amendment is not adopted. There are no further amendments at the desk. The clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File Number 601.
Third reading. Discussion to the bill. I want to say St. Louis, the member from St. Louis, Representative Scraba. Yes, St. Louis.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. I wasn't sure who was going to be first here, but I appreciate the time. I represent an area that have a lot of guns. I'd say one of the higher concentrations. And theft and loss. Most of the guns I would think in my district that people I represent are lost. A hunter. A duck hunter goes out, flips the canoe, flips the boat, the dog does, the gun is lost. We go home, we lick our wounds, like, I lost my best gun. I'm not thinking I'm a criminal now because I was in the woods for 4 days. And I have 48 hours to get to this, to get it in. You know, and there's no way I'm not gonna leave the woods to go to turn it in. I can think of another one where you borrow your gun to a friend, they go hunting, and accidentally lose it, and tragically, someone dies, drowns. It's days before anyone can figure out what happened and why. And now they're criminals because they didn't do it in the 48 hours. And I'm really cautious about this because I don't, again, maybe in the metro area where you have bigger issues than we do, our issues are a lot simpler, a lot more, we can figure it out for ourselves. But I'm looking at this bill and I just have a hard time wrapping my head around, can we just look at it a little longer and find some different ways? I understand the intent. I wholeheartedly agree that it should be somewhere you could tell people, I lost my gun. But why such a criminality to do it the way it is right now? The other, well, that's it for now. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The member from Beltrami, Representative Bliss.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I find it very interesting that at a time when we're lowering mandatory sentencing for violent crimes committed with a gun, we're making criminals out of the victims in this bill. I live in a rural area like a lot of us over here. I go out, I go out hunting, I'll clean my firearms, I'll store them away for the season, maybe not access them for another year. The term reasonable, should have known, or whatever it is that you're having that bill, it's very vague. And if I'm supposed to report it within 48 hours, if I don't check on my guns every 2 or 3 days, I don't know if any of them are missing. And it sounds kind of silly to people that don't live in the rural areas, but again, I have a deer rifle, I've got shotguns. I don't use my shotguns for deer season, I don't use my deer rifles for pheasants. I have varmint guns that I keep easily accessible. These guns, I don't babysit them. I don't check on them every day. So if I'm supposed to report them within 48 hours, if somebody came into my home and accessed my safe or my storage area and I don't find out about it for a month, I'm a criminal. How is this right? How is it justifiable? Again, at the same time we're lowering mandatory sentences for violent crimes with firearms, we're making criminals out of the victims in this bill. Thank you.
The member from Carver, Representative Nash.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So I wanted to talk about some of the impracticalities in the bill, and then I'm going to ask the author to yield to a question. But let's talk about lines 1.7 through 1.10, sort of leaning in on 1.9. So a person has to make a report as soon as practicable, but no later than 48 hours of the time the person knew or reasonably should have known the lost or theft. And I shared this scenario in Ways and Means, and I never really got an answer. So I will set the scenario for you, and it's this. Let's say somebody breaks into my home or somebody else's home, and a loved one is hurt in the process of that burglary. Do you actually think that I'm going to give a damn about going downstairs and checking my gun safe when I'm at the hospital, checking on my loved one, making sure that they're okay? Do you think that I'm going to, or somebody who's reasonable will take the time to say, rather than spend the time by the bedside of their loved one who has been harmed, I have to run home, folks, give me a minute. I know that you're on life support. I know that you're in danger, that you're not doing well. Do you think for a moment that that's going to happen? Because I don't, Representative Herr. I'm going to do the responsible thing, and if it's one of my kids, I'm going to be by their bedside. That's what I'm going to do. So in 48 hours' time, if someone actually did get into one of my gun safes and take something, now I'm a criminal for being a good dad. Let that sink in, folks. That's what this bill says is going to happen to me or you or somebody when somebody breaks into another person's house and is in the process of burglarizing them. Somehow shots get fired or someone gets harmed. And now, 48 hours later, that person's a criminal. You are victimizing a victim of crime. And what you are saying is that you prioritize the reporting of a lost or stolen gun over a person who might be in a hospital trying to get better and the responsible loved one is by their side. That's what this says. That's nuts. Now, Madam Speaker, if the author would yield.
She will yield. Representative Nash.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Herr, the other day in Ways and Means, things were moving quickly, and you said in Ways and Means, I just want to clarify what you said, that you have a deer rifle, and I think you got another one recently. Congratulations, by the way. That you store your deer rifle at a cabin that you only go to once a year. And I just want to make sure that I was operating from the proper premise, Madam Speaker, if she could answer that question.
Representative Herr.
Madam Speaker, Representative Nash, just one clarification. It's not a rifle, it's a shotgun that I own, and it is at a location in which it's a farm that I hunt at, and I only go there usually for deer hunting, so it's around one time a year, yes.
Representative Nash.
Okay, thank you, Madam Speaker. And maybe one day we can change it so that we're not just shotgun zone and rifle zone. I think a lot of us would vote for that. We should. We had a chance, but apparently Representative Sundin talked us all out of it because we might shoot over a hill and kill a cow. But back to this. So, Representative Herr, you have created a paradigm under which you might create yourself as a criminal by not knowing if your gun has been stolen from the farm in pick a place, Minnesota. At least we know it's south. It's in the shotgun zone. If she would, Madam Chair or Madam Speaker, answer that question.
Representative Herr.
Madam Speaker, Representative Nash, I think that that is the beauty of this bill, is that when it is that a person knew or reasonably should have known, if I haven't been back there in a year, I wouldn't reasonably know until I went back the year later and realized, oh, my shotgun is gone. I should report it within 48 hours.
Representative Nash.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. I guess my question as a follow-up to that is then, if someone were to break into my house and change the scenario, and we don't know until later that they broke in, I'm still a criminal, apparently, because as I've understood it from the conversation in Ways and Means, I should have known better when somebody mysteriously dressed all in black, broke into my house, stole something from me. I should just somehow know, because that's what I heard in Ways and Means. So I'm perplexed by this bill on multiple levels, but I think that the biggest problem is, again, in the scenario that I shared first. So if the author would yield to another question, I see her assent.
She will yield. Representative Nash.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, Representative Herr, let's go back to my very first scenario. Can you tell me what, as a concerned parent or husband or father-in-law, I should do if somebody breaks into my house, middle of the night, maybe scurries in through a window, and they harm one of my loved ones? Am I to rummage through my house and go through my safes and first make sure that nothing is stolen while my loved one is in the hospital? Or should I be a good dad and be by their side at the hospital?
Representative Herr.
Madam Speaker, Representative Nash, I'm perplexed at this continual line of question, because I did answer your question in Ways and Means. If you are tending to somebody that you love, you absolutely should. And then when you reasonably, after you are done tending to your loved one, come home and you realize, oh gosh, there was a robbery, and I'm gonna do an inventory because what if my computer is stolen? What if, I had cash stolen from me? What if my wife's jewelry was stolen? And you're doing that inventory and you find out, oh, your gun is missing, report it. It's not that difficult. So yes, tend to your family. No one is saying, go assess your guns first. I wouldn't tell you to go check your jewelry and go check your computer. I wouldn't tell you to go do that either. I'd say do what you need to do, and then when you reasonably know, that's when you report it. It's not a difficult concept.
Representative Nash.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And Representative Herr, I do appreciate the inclusion of a potential stolen laptop. That was well played. I don't read the bill that way. I see that I now have to immediately, because let's say I do think, well, I've been broken into. So that now triggers a clock saying I may have reasonably have an expectation that I've been burgled by someone. not the Hamburglar, but that I have been burgled by somebody and I may have lost something. Once again, I don't care. I'm going to go attend to my loved one. That's a higher priority. So now the juxtaposition is I may have an inkling that someone has burgled me, stolen from me, but the 48-hour clock is now running backwards. And if my loved one is transported somewhere away from the fine care given at Ridgeview Hospital in Waconia, I have to come down here to the cities, and I'm going to stay by their side because they are a higher priority. You've just made me a criminal when I am, in all actuality, a victim. So there's so many things wrong here, and the premise, I think, is a little shaky, but the penalties are well defined, and the shot clock is well defined, but again, I haven't gotten a very good answer on the things that have been asked. But members, this is a bad bill, and I can't support it. As a responsible gun owner, yes, I would feel compelled to make a report, just like Representative Novotny was talking about. But in the time that you've provided, apparently I'm just going to become a criminal after someone broke into my house. Thank you. Vote no.
The member from Wright, Representative Rarick.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, members. So this also perplexes me, and we had quite a robust conversation in Ways and Means. So I don't know, I was thinking about this, I can't think of any other situation where someone that is a victim of a crime, if they don't report the crime, that they are now a criminal. I can't think of anything. I can't even imagine. So imagine if a victim of a sexual assault, which we talk about this all the time. I talk about this all the time. What if a victim of a sexual assault didn't report the crime? We would never say, oh, we're going to charge you with a petty misdemeanor. Oh my gosh, no. That would never happen. What if I had someone break into my house and steal a set of knives? A set of steak knives. I've got really great steak knives. Love them. My daughter borrowed them and went camping with them, and they disappeared. What if we said, well, steak knives, if someone steals steak knives and uses them in a crime, and you don't report the theft of that steak knife or set of steak knives, you are now a criminal. We're going to charge you with a petty misdemeanor. What if, in my husband's home, he's a trades guy. He's got more tools than you could possibly count. He's an electrician, and plus, he's been collecting tools forever. So what if somebody broke into one of his outbuildings, because he's got a big piece of property. They broke into his outbuildings and they stole some of his tools, like a hammer, and then used that in a crime to hurt somebody. And because he didn't report the loss of a hammer, now he's going to be charged with a petty misdemeanor. We would never do this. Why in the world are we doing this? Why are we criminalizing a victim of a crime? We don't do it for sexual assault. We don't do it for any other thing that's been burglarized from our homes or outbuildings. There are a lot of us in the state of Minnesota that live in rural Minnesota and have all kinds of outbuildings with all kinds of things in them that can be stolen and used to hurt people. We don't do it with that. We don't charge them with a petty misdemeanor, make them a criminal because something was stolen and they didn't report it. Then you've got the known and should have known. You know how subjective that is? That is incredibly subjective language. So one county attorney in one particular county is going to be really aggressive with that. Well, you should have known. That's who gets to determine whether or not you should have known. You don't get to say, well, I shouldn't have known that because, you don't get to determine that as the victim of the crime of a theft, of a burglary, of a break-in. You don't get to determine that. Some county attorney gets to decide that. No. It's the county attorney, and there are some very aggressive county attorneys, and there are some really lax ones. You got the whole range in Minnesota. Every county attorney is duly elected by their county, and they represent the people of their county and what their ideologies are about crime. And it varies completely across the state of Minnesota. And in some places, they barely prosecute crime. In some places, they're very aggressive. In fact, I know that from Wright County because there's sort of a thing about Wright County. We take crime very seriously. We prosecute crime. Brian Lutz is is a good county attorney. He does a really good job. We've got a great sheriff, Sheriff Derringer. He's got a great team of deputies. He's the third largest in the state of Minnesota. That sheriff's department is the third largest. And we take crime seriously in Wright County. And if you commit a crime in Wright County, there is a really good chance you're going to get caught and you're going to be convicted. So there's sort of a thing. So when I've talked with other law enforcement folks, I won't name them here, but they have said things like, the criminals kind of know, if you're going to commit a crime, don't do it in Wright County. So we've got a wide variety of county attorneys in the state of Minnesota, incredibly wide, with all kinds of different ideologies and different ways to enforce or not enforce the law. So when you have this in here, should have known, that is terrifying. Should have known? By whose standard? By whose standard? Is it going to be the county attorney that takes crime seriously? Well, this kind of crime. Or is it going to be the county attorney that says, whatever? Depends on, that's called it's an injustice across the state of Minnesota. We don't have a fair justice system across the state of Minnesota because some places they prosecute crime, some places they don't. Some places they take certain crimes very seriously, and some places they don't take certain crimes very seriously. So when you talk about known or should have known, it's not that me as the crime victim gets to decide that. No. That isn't up to us to decide that. That's up to the county attorney. So if you want to roll the dice with that language, go right ahead. I'm not willing to roll the dice on that kind of language. I'll be a no on this because we don't do this to any other crime victim in the state of Minnesota. We don't do this to any other crime victim. Vote no, members.
The member from Wright, Representative Hudson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. You know, it's interesting. It was said earlier, and the point was made, I believe Chair Pinto made it, that we all want stolen guns to be reported as stolen. Therefore, we should be for this bill. Well, we're skipping a few steps there. We're going from A to maybe Q there. Because just because we would like to see something happen doesn't mean that the best way to go about it is to penalize not doing it. We're going to make it a crime to not report that your gun was stolen in an arbitrary, as been pointed out, most recently by Representative Rarick, an arbitrary judgment of a period of time, 48 hours from when it was stolen or when you reasonably should have known, as determined by whoever. I appreciate the fact, Representative Herr, that you grant grace to the scenario that Representative Nash paints of having a higher priority in the moment of taking care of loved ones who are sick, injured, have been attacked by somebody who broke into their home, whatever the case may be. I can't count on a prosecutor having that same grace. As was pointed out by Representative Rarick, we have a wide variety of styles and ideologies and priorities that govern prosecutions in the 87 counties in the state of Minnesota. And as legislators, as state legislators, we have to be precise in our action in terms of what it is that we're trying to affect. We had a couple of opportunities here tonight. We had an opportunity with Representative Ingen's amendment to put a pause on this and actually find out, well, wait a minute, why are we doing this? What is the actual problem? And does this intrusion upon the innocent, this criminalization of the innocent, is that in fact solving any problem whatsoever? And is this the best way to solve it? Rejected. We also had the opportunity to target our penalties against actual criminals, bad actors, people who act in bad faith against the rights, the liberty, the lives of our fellow Minnesotans. And just to correct the record, my amendment would not have reduced penalties. Right there in there said it does not prevent any other section of law from being applied. And so we can just stack them on up. God forbid that actual criminals, somebody who has, let's just think this through, think through the thought process. Let's compare the thought processes of the two people being targeted in these different scenarios. In the underlying bill, in this bill, we're targeting somebody who has no criminal intent whatsoever. They're a lawful gun owner who's been victimized. And through whatever set of circumstances, they neglected to report their gun being stolen, and so now, potentially, we're going to toss them in a cage. We're going to punish them. By contrast, you have the actual person who stole the gun. Now, what was their thought process? I'm going to go into this house where other people live. I'm going to trespass, and if I get caught, maybe I'll hurt them a little bit, and then I'm going to take what I want. And if that includes a gun, instead of us focusing on that person who not only has criminal intent but acts upon it, premeditated, followed up by action, lack of remorse, instead of focusing on them and making sure that they pay the maximum penalty, we're going to look to their victim and say, you know what? You should have known better. It's a hell of a thing. And I really can't comprehend the thought process that leads us to this, where we think that targeting the person whose firearm was stolen is going to solve the underlying problem. And, you know, there were some hints at the notion of someone intentionally not reporting that their gun was stolen. I think that's kind of, I gathered that implication at any rate, that that's one of the scenarios that we're trying to target, that somebody might I think the period of time that was mentioned was like a year, that a crime's been committed, their gun that belongs to them was found as a weapon that was used in the crime, and when you go to them and say, hey, how did your gun get in this person's hands? They say, oh, shucks, well, that was stolen a year ago. I haven't found that for a year. That was the example that was given. Well, and again, deferring to the grace of Representative Herr, you pointed out that in your interpretation of a reasonable period of time, you would take into account such things as, well, I store the gun in a building that I only visit once a year. Now, I trust that to be true, but somebody could just make that up, couldn't they? They could just say, well, you know, I haven't been to that place where I store that gun in a year. I had no idea it was missing. That's why I didn't report it. This is an imprecise measure that doesn't actually target bad actors. The only people who are going to be affected by this are people who are innocent and who are caught up in a legal scenario that they couldn't possibly anticipate, because nobody in their right mind would ever imagine that their state would be looking to prosecute them for being a victim. Nobody expects that. Nobody reasonably ought to expect that, and yet that's what we're doing here on the House floor today. Vote no, members.
The member from Meeker, Representative Gilman.
Thank you so much, Madam Speaker. What House File 601 does is penalize the victim of the theft who fails to report their missing firearm within 48 hours. And we've talked about, or within, if they knew about it within a reasonable amount of time. I'm just curious in this room, how many of us have experienced a theft? I have. How many? Oh, actually, we're going to get some hands. Okay. All kinds, there we go. Thank you so much for showing me that. All kinds of things can happen when that does happen, when we have thefts happen. You know, ranges of emotions, of just mixed emotions. There could be physical things that are involved in that. But there's a vulnerability in this as well. And one thing I want to say about myself and my family is we are law-abiding gun owners. And we're real grateful. And we safely store our guns. And we would definitely report things if they were lost or stolen, or anything that was lost or stolen. I've invited people into my home for years, and we've created a warm environment in our house. And I've had things stolen right out of my home from a fun day at the lake, and it was very disturbing. You know, very expensive things stolen. And it's not fun, because it affects relationships, things like that. Hard conversations can happen. But when we're talking about guns, I'm just curious what your thoughts are on this, bringing this piece of legislation forward. What it does is penalizes the victims of these thefts. There was a survey done in 2018 from the RAND Corporation, and they found no research demonstrating that lost or stolen reporting laws produce any desirable outcomes. Specifically, they noted that when we found no qualifying studies showing that the lost or stolen firearms reporting requirement decreased any of the 8 outcomes they investigated. So there was data that was collected from this. The 8 outcomes that they investigated were officer-involved shootings, mass shootings, suicide, unintentional injuries and deaths, and violent crime. I think what we have to keep going back to is criminals cannot be compelled to report lost or stolen items. Criminals are not compelled to abide by the law, period. So, in other words, if people out there are currently prohibited from owning or possessing a firearm for one reason or another, and let's just talk about what those reasons are, why people cannot own a firearm. They might be a felon. Do you know that if you have a felony, you cannot own or possess a firearm? They've been dishonorably discharged from the military. And they've been trained well in the military how to use firearms. But if you've been dishonorably discharged from the military, or another reason is if you've been previously adjudicated with mental illness is another reason. If you're adjudicated from being mentally ill and dangerous. So again, nonetheless, they all might be breaking the law by possessing or using a firearm. So I'd also be just real curious just if you all knew that. So if you are at your hunting shack or if you're at your house and you're doing some, the fastest growing sport in our state is trap shooting. So if you have folks over, you better get real personal with your people that are coming over to your house to see, you know, could be a coworker that's a felon. Could be somebody that was dishonorably discharged from the military and you had didn't know about this. So just them possessing your firearm could be a crime. So again, what House File does, 601 does, is it penalizes the victim of the theft. And it's really unfortunate that we didn't take the DE1, Engen's amendment, because I believe we do need to collect more data to make sure what we're doing is ensuring that we, that are lawfully abiding can continue to do so without further penalties. So vote no.
The member from Douglas, Representative Franson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. So here's a situation I've been thinking about, well, actually for a couple of weeks now, about someone that lives right across the street from me. So let's just hypothetically say now, this individual who has harassed me, who has stalked me, knows when I'm coming and going, and also knows the schedule of the legislature. So he knows that I'm not at home, and he knows there's not another figure, adult figure, living at that house. Let's say that same neighbor likes to find information out on you and decides that it's his right to dig through your garbage to see what kind of fun stuff you may have in there. For instance, this neighbor thought it was pretty funny to find an unopened card from Representative Swedinsky, held on to it for 2 years, and then decided to call his office and say, hey, just let you know, I've got this beautiful holiday card that Representative Franson did not open. Now let's just say this guy who is running for office, a felon, decides that he wants to get more personal, wants to walk into my home somehow, where I do have handguns, hidden, of course, but he's got time because he knows my schedule. He knows I'm not coming home until Thursday or Friday, maybe Saturday, maybe Sunday, maybe not for 2 weeks, because it's the end of session. I go home, nothing looks amiss. I go home like any other person does. I don't really think about people coming into my home. But what if I go to use my handgun one day and I realize my handgun is missing? Under this bill, the bill includes a knowing or reasonably should have known of their loss or theft standard, and it is highly subjective. Should I, knowing that I have a crazy person across the street from me that digs through my garbage, should I always, every time I go home, be checking for my handguns? Is that something that I need to do? So I go home, maybe it's a late Thursday night. First thing I do, don't even grab my clothes from the car or my items. I go check to see if my handguns are there. Under this bill, I feel like that, if they ended up disappearing, what is to stop a prosecutor from saying, you should have known? You should have known that this situation was happening or could have happened. I think this is a very terrible bill, horrible bill, a bill that puts law-abiding citizens in a position of being guilty of a crime. Meanwhile, criminals in the state of Minnesota, they're not going to follow this rule. It's just another law to punish law-abiding citizens, just like every other gun bill that's on the books. It's the legal citizens that are punished. Meanwhile, the wackos, the crazies, the ones that dig through your garbage and maybe go through your house or want to go through your house, they're the ones that get off scot-free. Members, I highly suggest that we vote no on this bill. Thank you.
The member from Anoka, Representative Niska.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and appreciate a lot of the comments we've had so far, especially relating to the data. Thank you, Representative Gilman, for that data. This is really not a very well thought out or a good policy move, and we should reject it on that grounds. But I think as a House, we send a powerful statement today by this vote about whose side we are on in the theft situation that we're talking about. Are we on the side of a burglar or a thief? Or are we on the side of the crime victim? And I appreciated the scenarios that Representative Nash had played out, and Representative Herr's comments about when the clock starts. It's based on when a victim reasonably should have known. There's a lot of problems with that standard. But when a victim reasonably should have known, you know, it's possible the victim will have some other priorities in their life over the next 48 hours besides immediately going to law enforcement and reporting that theft. And Representative Nash had some good examples. But there are some other situations in which I think we would all agree that a crime victim might have some other important things to do besides immediately think, like Representative Hudson was saying, immediately assume, oh, the state of Minnesota is going to criminalize me if I don't immediately go and report this particular item that was stolen from me. And I know this hypothetical might sound far-fetched. It might sound hard to believe, but imagine that the thief, a burglar perhaps, is a family member that's causing the victim to feel like they need some protection from that family member. And so their first priority is to go and get a harassment restraining order. Or, again, this is maybe even more far-fetched, but imagine that the victim realized they were being burglared because they stepped out of their bed and there was someone on the floor in their bedroom. Can you imagine how that would cause that crime victim to fear for their safety and to think that maybe they have other priorities in the next 48 hours to protect their own safety than to immediately go and figure out if their gun was stolen and report it to the authorities? Now, and I know this is really hard to believe, this hypothetical, but imagine that the burglar was a public figure who had high-paid defense lawyers who were putting up...
Representative Niska, I would just encourage you to be very careful not to use particular personalities in the debate. Representative Niska.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I appreciate that Mason's 124 means we need to talk about the particular issue in front of the body and not talk about personalities. And I'm not talking about any particular person. I'm again purely hypothetically, if the burglar, the thief, was a public figure and was engaging in public speech about what this incident was, that victim may have other priorities in that first 48 hours than to assume or to be aware maybe that the legislature has criminalized their failure to report that theft and go and do that. And the problem that this creates in the context of the bill that we're debating is that, again, the standard is known or should have or reasonably should have known about the theft, and then your obligation under penalty of criminal sanction to go ahead and report that as a theft victim, So whose side are we on? Whose side are we on as a legislature? Are we on the side of the crime victims or not? I'm concerned about what the outcome of the vote here today is going to be and what the people of Minnesota are going to take from that vote. So members, please vote no.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Robbins.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, members. I appreciate the debate on this tonight because I think in general, we all would expect, and I think law-abiding gun owners do, report lost or stolen guns. And I know that's true in my family and my friends who are gun owners, and I think that's true in general of law-abiding gun owners. So my concern about this bill isn't that we don't want to report lost or stolen guns, it's that we are criminalizing the victim of a crime when their gun is stolen. And I'm also concerned, members, that not only are they getting criminal penalties for just failing to report in 48 hours, but they're further subject, as it says in the bill, to criminal prosecution of an offense regarding safe storage of firearms. So there's a double penalty when they were, in fact, the victim of a crime. And it's really concerning that there's also no exemptions for when you lend a gun to someone. So I just have an example from my own family. My daughter was on the trap team when she was in high school. And her first year on the trap team, she was just very petite. And we didn't have a gun that suited her, but one of our neighbors did. So for the entire trap season, she was borrowing our neighbor's gun. And it went, great. She had a great season. And at the end of the season, we gave the gun back. But if during that time, that gun would have been lost or stolen from my house, the owner of the gun, my neighbor, would have been criminally subject to these penalties when it had nothing to do with them and their house wasn't even broken into. So I just think this legislation is not very carefully thought out. And I further think, I'm not the only one who says that. The Sheriff's Association says that while they do not object to reporting lost or stolen guns, they do think the language isn't very clear. And they think there's ambiguity in the standard of reasonably should have known. And in most statutes, we say no or should have known. And the insertion of the word reasonably leaves this open to very broad interpretation and I'm sure litigation. And members, I think we need to do a better job of listening to the law enforcement officials. We made mistakes last session on the SRO bill when people were telling us from the law enforcement community, this isn't clear, don't do this, we need clarification. And then we had months of fighting and wrangling trying to get clarity on the SRO issue. We should not be doing that and repeating those same mistakes. Clearly, law enforcement has concerns about this standard of reasonably should have known, and that should be spelled out much more clearly with agreed upon language with peace in the valley before we go forward with anything like this, members. So this bill has a lot of problems. I think all citizens of Minnesota think it's reasonable to expect people to report lost or stolen guns. Oh, but the other thing that's sort of funny about this is, so the victim of the crime has to report the lost or stolen gun within 48 hours. And they report it to their chief law enforcement officer, who then has 7 days to report it to the commissioner of public safety. So we're putting this really tight window on the victim of the crime and giving law enforcement officials who report it further up the chain 7 days. Members, this does not make sense, and we should reconsider. Thank you.
Members, folks who are listening in the gallery are having a difficult time hearing. This space is very echoey, so if you can just please take your conversations off of the House floor. The member from Clearwater, Representative Grossell.
Madam Speaker and members, I look at this bill and I just scratch my head because of all the years in law enforcement, all the years working on gangs, guns, violent crimes, working on these very things, gun thefts, all of that stuff. I've never had a lack, or very few times has there ever really been anyone who has not reported the theft of their firearms. Anybody who is a law-abiding citizen, if they own a gun store, private property, whatever, they have weapons stolen from them. And who do they call? Well, geez, they call law enforcement and they report this crime. Maybe I'm missing something here, because this bill is just completely unnecessary as far as I know. And I'm just wondering if the author would yield to a question, Madam Speaker.
She will yield. Representative Grossell.
Representative Herr, please, has there been this massive increase in law-abiding citizens not reporting firearms stolen?
Representative Herr.
Madam Speaker, Representative Grosso, there actually has been a large increase in firearms that are lost or stolen. What I would like to share with you is that when this bill was introduced in 2003, MPPOA supported this file, and they stated that it is an important public safety measure. With gun thefts on the rise, laws requiring gun owners and dealers to report lost or stolen guns can significantly help prevent gun trafficking. Stolen guns can be diverted to the illegal gun market where they are used to fuel crime. Lost and stolen reporting laws help reduce gun trafficking by requiring individuals to report loss or theft to law enforcement shortly after discovering it. And so this is actually directly from MPPOA in a letter that they wrote when the bill was introduced to support the bill, and they are saying they are seeing a huge increase in lost and stolen guns.
Representative Grosso.
So in other words, no. That's the long answer, the word salad to the answer no. Law-abiding citizens are reporting weapons being stolen. Criminals don't do that. Criminals don't report. They can't, they won't, and they never will report firearms being stolen from them. Now the MPPOA, I support them, but sometimes, you know, that letter there, they needed to read this stuff a little bit closer. And we'll talk to them eventually about that. But anyway, all this bill does is it criminalizes law-abiding citizens instead of going after the perpetrators. Now, folks, we got laws on the books already for reporting firearms stolen. Law-abiding citizens do that already. This bill is not a solution to a problem. Let that sink in. This bill is not a solution. We have the laws in place, and all that we need to do, enforce those laws, prosecute those laws, and sentence accordingly. That's been lacking in this state. Sadly, that has been lacking. As I said, criminals don't follow the laws. Criminals don't report guns stolen because guess what? They probably stole them all as it was. So if they get stolen from them, what's the criminal going to do? They're going to go steal from another law-abiding citizen. So, I mean, we can talk, say a bunch of fancy stuff or whatever. Bottom line is, this is not a solution. There's no problem here that is not already being dealt with, except for you're adding with this bill to criminalize victims. They've already been burglarized. They've already been robbed. Why do you got to kick them in the teeth while they're down? Why do you got to re-victimize them further? To me, this is just another backdoor attack at our Second Amendment rights. Why is it only guns that you want reported? Those aren't the only things that are used in violent crimes. Heck, I've seen hatchets used. I've seen baseball bats used. I've seen machetes used. For crying out loud, people. This bill should not even be here. It should not even be on this House floor. It shouldn't even be considered right now. We have stuff in place to do this very job already. And law-abiding citizens do their part by reporting these crimes, by reporting when firearms are stolen. They want them back. But you guys, y'all seem so heck bent on punishing law-abiding citizens. It's really sickening now. So I'd ask you to vote no on this bill.
The member from Isanti, Representative Johnson.
Madam Speaker, members, here we go again, making criminals out of law-abiding citizens. while we have bills to reduce the penalties of violent offenders, those who commit violent crimes and homicides, reducing the minimum mandatory sentences, reducing the minimum mandatory sentences on those who commit violent crimes with a firearm, but you want to make criminals out of those who legally own a firearm. Absolutely bonkers. Now, I've been going over this bill, and I just noticed something. In the immunity clause, it says a person who reports a lost or stolen firearm in compliance with the requirements of subdivision 1 is immune from criminal prosecution for the offense pursuant to state law related to the storage of firearms. We got another bill coming up, 4300. If my firearm was stolen and it was not in my gun safe, I wouldn't be immune from prosecution if I didn't report it within 48 hours. But if it wasn't in the gun safe and it was stolen, even if I reported it, I'd still be in violation of this law. And I'd be a criminal. I don't know what to say here. This is a little crazy. Now, it's unfortunate we have to make criminals out of law-abiding citizens, attacking law-abiding firearm owners. And to say that law enforcement doesn't take the reports of these and put it in a database already, we have that. Any lost or stolen firearm is entered into the computer system. And Representative Herr, whoever told you that they can't do anything about it, was not in law enforcement. If they were pretending to be. Oh, that's right. Right now, Minneapolis and a few departments of the city is not responding to victimless crimes anymore. So it'd be tough to get that information. Now, one thing you have to remember, though, law enforcement does their job the best they can. They want to know who, and they are strong supporters of firearms and their First Amendment rights. But what they don't want is criminals to have the firearms. Because to become a criminal means you do not follow the law. We have a lot of work ahead of us. And we're going to be spending hours today on these bills dealing with removing of people's Second Amendment rights, constitutional rights given to us by God. Now we have, don't know why we want to make criminals out of law-abiding citizens, but it's frustrating. I want to thank Representative Engen and Representative Hudson for the amendments they tried to put on, which had actually made these bills better, made them useful. But that didn't happen. And I'm also concerned about how this bill is written. Reasonably known. It's interesting when you look up the definition, how it goes. And that's be a different interpretation by every county attorney, if it happens in the county. But in the cities, in town, it's going to be done either by the city prosecutor or maybe the county attorney if it's a third offense. So there'll be 700 different interpretations of reasonably known. Poorly written, very poorly written. 36,000 for a database that we already have. Then I feel sorry for our law enforcement community. Not only do you have to enter all these, it's got to be reported within 48 hours, but you've reasonably known. But law enforcement has to get it entered in this state computer, federal computer, and now another database. More time for staff to get things entered into systems when we already have those systems in place. Members, vote against this bill. We don't need to make criminals out of our law-abiding citizens who are struggling just to pay their bills with the economy right now, struggling to get to work, struggling to keep their families fed, with inflation up dramatically. Everybody I know that's had a firearm lost or stolen has reported it, because the value of them right now is so high that they need to turn them into their insurance company. And without reporting it, the insurance company won't pay off. Members, vote against this bill. It's ridiculous.
The member from Wright, Representative McDonald.
Madam Speaker, just in reading the bill, Representative Herr, and with all due respect, because you certainly do your homework and you're an astute lawmaker, it's actually, I consider it, and same with my friends and colleagues in Wright County, it's actually an insult to Minnesotans to think that these lawmakers have to pass a law to require us to report something that's stolen in our personal property. Do we really need to be told that? I mean, how unwise, how dumb do you think the Minnesotans are? That, think about it, if your house is stolen, if your house is broken into, you're going to call the police. If there's something stolen, you're going to call the police. If your house is on fire, what are you going to do? Call the fire department. If your car is hijacked, you're going to call the police. So just reading the language and just thinking about the philosophical ideas behind the principle of it, it's actually an insult to think that we're so dumb that we need to be told by lawmakers to call the police if something's stolen in our house. I don't know, it's really, it doesn't make sense at all, because we already have laws on the books that if a firearm is stolen, you have to report it to the police. But it's an insult. Just think about it for a moment. Your house is broken into, and something's stolen. You take an inventory. They stole my TV and a couple of guns and my blender. We have a really nice blender. Got it for our wedding anniversary years ago. And it's stolen. The first impulse is you're going to call the police. Why in the San Juan do you think that we need lawmakers to tell us what we have to do if something's stolen? And particularly a firearm, because we know firearms are a very valuable possession, first of all. They're expensive. And in many cases, they're family heirlooms, passed on from generation to generation. But yet, some folks here at the Capitol, and I'm glad that my name's not on this bill, because it's an insult, actually, to think that we need to have a law to call police that something was stolen in our property. Just let that sink in for a moment. Again, Representative Herr, with all due respect, at least the folks in Wright County, and I would presume all over the state, are thinking, really, I mean, don't we have better things to do? You already spent $18 billion surplus. You raised taxes by $10 billion. We're already going to be in a deficit by 25 and 26. And you want to have another $500 million in a supplemental bill that you're going to spend this year, put us even further in debt. We have a bonding bill with very important projects, including some in Wright County, right, folks in Wright County over here, and all over the 87 counties. And yet we're wasting our time on a bill that is just common sense. If something's stolen, you're going to call the police. If your house is on fire, you're going to call the fire department. If your car is hijacked, you're going to call the police. If you're beaten up on the streets, you're going to call the police. Folks, just use a little common sense. Now, you're going to pass this. I'm not going to talk you out of it. You've already heard from many of my colleagues that you potentially could make a criminal out of someone who had a crime against that person. That alone, again, is not only insult, it's asinine, pardon my French, to make a criminal out of a guy, a gal that had a crime committed on his own personal property. I'll be doggone. I don't know what's the matter with you, us lawmakers here. Folks out in my district can't believe that we have nothing better to do than pass a law stating that we must call the police when we've been a crime against us. Oh, duh. My Uncle Flip McDonald on the old McDonald farm, he had a saying for us young kids would milk the cows and bale the hay. If we did something dumb, he'd say, "How dumb are you?" You know, kids do something dumb. Well, Minnesotans aren't dumb. If something's stolen, beaten up, a fire, or firearm, we will be calling the police sooner than later. We don't need a law to tell us we need to do it in 48 hours. That's ridiculous. I'll close with this, and he was right. One of my favorite presidents of the United States, besides Lincoln, is Ronald Reagan. And I wasn't even looking for this quote, but the good Lord must have given it to me, because I was looking for something else. He said, "We must reject the idea that every time a law is broken, society is guilty rather than the lawmaker. It is time to restore American precept that each individual is accountable for his or her action." Let's get some common sense. This bill is not necessary because it really is an insult to our intellect. Again, no respect, Representative Herr, you're a smart person. But this particular bill is an insult, and it certainly is, it's almost wounding that we would need a law to tell us to call when our guns are stolen. Well, anyway, that's all I have to say. I would support and all my colleagues to vote no and have a little common sense and trust Minnesotans to do the right thing. I know I trust them.
The member from St. Louis, Representative Zalesnikar.
Madam Speaker and members, House File 601 is about lost and stolen firearms. And gun violence is something that concerns every member in this room in the state of Minnesota. Reporting lost and stolen guns isn't an issue for law-abiding citizens. It's been stated many times. It's common sense. This is an issue for Minnesotans because now we're going to criminalize those who are victims of crime. The issue I have with this law is the fact that the words, "when the person knows or reasonably should have known in 48 hours," that is extremely subjective in 87 counties. We don't have to look very far around this state to see subjectivity happening in the law enforcement world. So how are Minnesotans going to expect that their situation for reasonable is going to be interpreted as reasonable similarly across 87 counties? One could argue they have reason to be concerned. In fact, Minnesota Sheriff's Association is concerned. They're concerned about the 48 hours. They're concerned about the words in here, "when the person knew or reasonably should have known," because that in itself tells you there's a lot of subjectivity. And are you going to put yourself in the mercy of somebody's definition of this? How does one person describe reasonable? How does another person describe reasonable? It's quite different across the state of Minnesota. In fact, it's so different that this bill created 3 tiers of penalties for law-abiding Minnesotans who are victims of crime. It starts as a petty misdemeanor. That's the first one. Then it goes to a misdemeanor, and then it goes to a gross misdemeanor. And while that sounds real minimal, it's interesting to Minnesotans when they also see bills introduced that eliminate anything. It eliminates mandatory minimum sentences for offenses involving possession or use of a firearm or dangerous weapon. So we're talking about reducing gun violence, and yet we are not dealing with criminals involved in gun crimes. There's a little bit of connect the dot problem here across the state of Minnesota. And clearly, Minnesotans are wondering, is the goal really to change criminal behavior, to protect public safety? when we're going to propose bills that say let's eliminate any minimum sentence. This doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense to me. It doesn't make many sense to Minnesotans who are emailing me. So we are redefining words. Right now, criminals are people who encountered the criminal justice system. Encountered. It's not like you went to a day spa and you had an encounter. You were a criminal. It doesn't need to be rebranded to you encountered the criminal justice system, but yet we're making it seem like they just went to a spa. Nothing happened. No, something did happen. It's called crime. It's called crime. And we're not going to have any minimum sentencing for the people that commit crimes. That's like a Monopoly game. Get out of free pass. I mean, that was a game. This is Minnesotans' public safety. And it is inexcusable that this is the state of Minnesota that we are talking about criminalizing people who already report when they know they have a stolen or lost gun. To Representative McDonald, it's common sense. Greater Minnesota does this all the time. People in the suburbs, there are, let's just say, 98,585 Minnesotan registered guns, and that was in 2020. Those numbers are higher now. I can't believe that the 5.6 million Minnesotans that are here don't understand when you report a lost or stolen gun. Because law-abiding citizens spend a lot of money, and their possessions, when it's missing, they're going to report it. But to put these time frames of 48 hours and to penalize people that aren't the criminal, while we're equally not going to penalize people who are the criminal, you can't make this up. This would only happen in Minnesota. This is absolutely ridiculous. And I urge members to vote no. We are about protecting victims. We are about holding criminals accountable. This bill isn't going to change criminal behavior one bit. I'm all for reporting lost and stolen guns, and law-abiding citizens are going to continue doing this. But victimizing them is absolutely un-Minnesotan and unacceptable. And we need to be supporting bills in this chamber that actually prosecute the criminal. Vote no.
The member from Crow Wing, Representative Davis.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Another example here of how the Democrat majority is coming after law-abiding citizens. That's what this is. It's wrong. You know, we've heard a lot from former law enforcement on this floor. Really appreciated Representative Novotny's words earlier and the wisdom that he brings to this House floor. Representative Grossel and his experience and the words that he has brought to this floor along with his wisdom. And Representative Johnson, I wish he was on the floor right now, but that's okay. I thought about asking him to yield for some questions, but that's okay. Excellent job by Representative Johnson, the wisdom he brings and the experience that he brings to this House floor. They all pointed out how ridiculous this legislation is. Former law enforcement who actually know what the heck they're talking about. I've also heard from others who know what they're talking about. They're called my sheriffs in my district. I've had great conversations with them on these bills, on this bill and other bills that we're going to be talking about later tonight. I can't wait to get to those later tonight. You're not listening to wisdom. This bill criminalizes crime victims. Did you hear that? This bill criminalizes those
who are victims of crime. And I don't understand what, the year and a half I've been here, I don't understand what this Democrat majority is doing. I've seen you empower criminals and go after law-abiding citizens. I don't understand it. Maybe I'll get ruled out of order for this, but I'm a pastor, I'm a preacher, so I like to go to the Word of God. Isaiah 5:20 says, "Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness, who put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter." It doesn't make sense to go after law-abiding citizens and make up bills and laws that potentially criminalize them. That's not right. It's not right. And our sheriffs, my sheriffs, many other folks' sheriffs in this room have expressed to them they don't understand it either. It's like you just keep coming for our God-given Second Amendment rights. You keep coming after law-abiding citizens rather than focusing on actual criminals. Now, it's time for us to take a step back. It's time to take a step back and ask yourself, what am I really trying to accomplish here? Why am I doing this? And Minnesota is paying attention. Thank God they're paying attention. This bill criminalizes crime victims. This bill criminalizes the victims of crime instead of going after the perpetrators of crime. This bill does nothing to get guns out of the hands of criminals. And this bill swings blindly at fixing a problem that does not exist, because law-abiding citizens already do report it when they know that their guns have been stolen. And I heard the argument, well, that's why we need to pass the law. Yep, again, the heavy hand of government coming down, forcing itself upon its citizenry, saying, yeah, Big Brother's here to make sure. That's exactly what this bill is. It doesn't trust law-abiding citizens. And I can give you examples. Sure, I'll take the time to give you some examples of where this could go wrong. You know, the area I live in Mission Township, which is next to Ideal Township, which is in the Cross Lake area. We have a lot of folks in our area who got weekend cabins where they store their firearms. Folks who reside in Florida, folks who reside in Texas, far away, but they got their cabins up in my neck of the woods, and they have firearms locked up in there. Someone could break in. Someone could break in at, 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, a burglar, dressed in black clothes. Break in through a basement window.
Point of order, Madam Speaker.
Representative Long, please state your point of order.
Masons 124 members should confine remarks to questions before the House and avoid personalities.
Members, I'd remind you, Mason's Manual Section 101, debate must be confined to the question before the body. And Mason's 124, personalities not permitted in debate. In debate, a member must confine remarks to the question before the House and avoid personalities.
Madam Speaker, point of order.
Representative Nash, you may not raise a point of order in the middle of a point of order until I decide to rule or not rule on the point of order. Generally speaking, members, we avoid ruling on points of order and just remind the body to follow the rules. So Representative Nash, I will defer on ruling on the long point of order. Representative Nash, for what purpose do you rise?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I was just trying to figure out what personalities were being invoked in the last speech by Representative Davis. I honestly, I'm just trying to figure out whose personality are we impugning?
Representative Nash, there has been no ruling. There's been an admonition, and I think you're plainly aware of the facts that have been debated in the state of Minnesota over the past few days, and I think we all know who Representative Davis is talking about. Representative Davis.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I'm just using a hypothetical here that's realistic. I sure hope we don't turn to playing these games again of interrupting the speaker because you don't like what he says. And Madam Speaker, I'm not saying that that's what you're doing, but I hope that's not what we're doing. Thank you, Madam Speaker. So someone could break into your home, and a lot of law-abiding citizens who have guns have a wonderful safe in their basement. Someone could break in through a basement window to burglarize their firearms. They could be a good burglar, sneak in without alerting the neighbors, or perhaps you're even home. Like in my situation, maybe I'm at home sleeping in bed, and a really good burglar breaks in, and I don't even know it. I don't even know it. I mean, pick your scenario. They break in, they get into your gun storage cabinet, wherever that may be. The example here I'm using is in your basement. And they break into that gun cabinet, they steal your gun. Perhaps they pick the lock. I don't know. I don't know about you, but I've seen a lot of Hollywood movies where they can, you know, pick the lock and listen to the little combo on the safe. Maybe, right? They get in there, take your gun, lock it back up, get out of the house, and you have no idea that they even did it. And I'm supposed to report it in 48 hours. Where I don't know about you guys, but there's days that go by where I don't check my gun cabinet, not weeks, because I love my guns, but days, especially when I'm here at the legislature. So someone could burglarize me, I don't know it, and then I'm supposed to trust a prosecuting attorney with whether I should be charged as a criminal or not? Boy, this language is way too vague for my liking, and I believe this language is way too vague for Minnesota's liking. I mean, just in my opinion, we got some prosecuting attorneys that... I better move on, never mind. See, you're being the purveyors of the ever-growing beast of government. That's what I see. The ever-growing beast of government. House File 601 is another example of empowering that beast of government to go after its citizens. I'll go into this more later, but our founding fathers had the wisdom of studying history and knowing that when government gets big, too big, it comes after its people. And that's what House File 601 does. Criminalizing law-abiding citizens, and maybe you're getting sick of me hearing it. If you get sick of hearing me say it, then I'm doing my job. Who is deciding that the law-abiding citizen who is just victimized, that they should know? They should know. They should have known. We're going to leave that in the hands of a prosecuting attorney. No offense, Representative Pinto, but that scares me. And again, someone already pointed out, we're going after guns here. When crimes are committed all day long, Representative Grossel, with other weaponry, knives, baseball bats, flashlights. You ever seen a big black flashlight with a bunch of Duracell batteries in there? Used to have one as a kid. It was awesome. And you could get a 3-cell or a 5-cell, and man, that thing was a weapon. Cars are used as weapons. But yeah, here we go. We're going after guns. Because I got to be careful what I say here, but guns are not evil. And law-abiding citizens are not evil. Another example of this Democrat majority coming after law-abiding citizens. That's what this is. Instead of going after criminals. Please vote no on House File 601, members. It just doesn't make any sense. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The member from Sherburne, Representative Lawrence.
Good afternoon, Madam Speaker. Thank you. Members, welcome this afternoon. I need to speak on behalf of, not on behalf of this bill, but towards this bill, House File 601. I know I'm new to the House, the youngest member here. I know I've not been through as many sessions as each of you. I know that I haven't sat in hardly any committees and discussed a lot of this in depth on any level. But for this one in particular, I feel necessary to speak towards. As I reviewed this bill, you start reviewing it, and I look through the timelines that are established in the bill here and that are set. I didn't think much of them. I disagreed with them. I didn't think much of them, though. I went through the timelines as you go through a little bit more. But I got to the part about petty misdemeanor. That struck me like a brick wall. I understand the reporting. I understand what the goal of the bill was and all that stuff, all that. But when I hit petty misdemeanor, I was like, what in the world are we doing? Why is that in there? I can understand you want people to report when something's been stolen, whether a gun or a car or whatever, to make a report. But why a petty misdemeanor is included in this bill? What is the necessity of that being in the bill? It didn't seem reasonable. It didn't seem like it was something that fit. And it really caught me by surprise. And it brought me to this question. And it's going to be a rhetorical question, but a question that I think we have to ask. Why would we propose a law that would charge an innocent, law-abiding citizen of a petty misdemeanor? Why? Why would the House propose a law that would charge an innocent, law-abiding citizen of a petty misdemeanor of a crime? I can't come up with a reason. Why would this body propose a law that would charge an innocent person, a person that abides by the laws that we've set, this House has set, abides by them, of a crime? Members, I cannot vote for this bill. I understand its meaning. I understand its purpose. But when we have in legislation the foundation of charging innocent people of crimes, I cannot support that. I cannot vote for this legislation that criminalizes innocent, law-abiding citizens. I would urge those in this room to vote with me and vote no on this bill.
The member from Clay, Representative Joy. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When I look at this bill, all I can think of is what Representative Lawrence says, is this victimizes law-abiding citizens. When we go and buy our guns, or we do that, we take pride. So when we get burglarized in our house, or like, you know, people in my district, when they get burglarized, when that happens and somebody comes into your house and steals from you or does a theft or an act on you, whether it's during the day or at night, you're confused. You're surprised somebody was in your house. You don't know what they took. Yes, the first thing we do is we call law enforcement. Law enforcement show up. They ask you if you're okay. They go through your house. And they try to figure out where the point of entry was, where the person came in to burglarize your house or steal from you. You didn't do an inventory. Some people leave their house that night and don't go back until today or yesterday. They could be gone for a week because they're scared to be in their house because somebody came in from the outside. You know, so now when somebody gets burglarized and they find out that they were missing a gun and they get back to their house after being gone for a week because they wanted their house secure, so they make sure that doesn't happen again. So they had the locksmith out, they had everybody out. When that happens, say they all of a sudden figure out they lost a firearm during this, that they didn't go check because they just wanted to get out of the house. Now, they could be charged. So are we telling them with our new 601 we're putting forward that you'll be charged? So now they hold back and go, well, I don't know if I want to go do that. I could be criminalized on this. You know, this rule here is overreaching for government. You know, we take none of the victims into our thought process. We're hoping that when they come and tell us that they won't get charged. We know how that turns out. But again, why are we turning around and taking law-abiding citizens and criminalizing them? We're not controlling criminals. We're not doing more gun control here. This is just overreach of the government again. This is the Democrats coming after you again and telling you what you will and won't do. And I think this, as we continue to go down these rabbit holes and write these great gun laws that we're going to hear later on that are not great, we're going to just take Second Amendment people and we're going to make them more of a criminal. You know, even if I think of many people, when I was a kid, I had a bike stolen. The first thing we did is we called law enforcement. And at that time, we didn't have the safe bike register, so my serial number wasn't recorded. And about 3 weeks later, they found my bike. You know, but when we tell law-abiding citizens they're going to be penalized if they don't report this in 48 hours. That's like telling a kid if he misbehaves at school, he'll get his bike taken away. So when he comes home from school, he's not going to come home and be like, hey, Dad, I misbehaved at school. He don't want his bike taken away. The same thing. We're going to criminalize somebody if they find out that their firearm was stolen and they didn't report it within the 48 hours. This bill is not ready for prime time. This bill should not even be on the floor. We need to take another look at this and think about every player on this bill. Like I said, if it's somebody that was burglarized in their house, a theft happened, and they just want to get out of their house because they're scared of what just took place. They don't know what they are missing. They just know somebody was in there. What they find on the person, if they catch that criminal, is what they know they lost. But they don't know anything else. They just want to get out of their house. They don't want to be back there. And we're going to go and punish people because they left their house and didn't stay there to inventory everything in their house. Everyone, I ask a vote no on this bill. Thank you.
The member from Dakota, Representative Whitty.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, members. When I was on patrol, we'd do the what-if game. And the what-if game would be, if I'm going to pull a vehicle over, are they going to stop or am I going to have to pursue them? And what would I do at that moment? Another one was, if I was in a crowd, what would I do if someone pulled a gun? And what are the exits? And how do I keep people safe? One of my favorites was the what-if game was, if I stop that car and it's my mom driving, what do I do? Thank God that never happened. Madam Speaker, will Representative Herr stand for a question, please?
She will yield for a question. Representative Whitty.
Thank you. Representative Herr, the part as I'm looking at this and the what if comes to mind here is 1.15 in the bill, sub 3, immunity. A person who reports a lost or stolen firearm in compliance with the requirements of subdivision 1 is immune from criminal prosecution for an offense pursuant to state law related to the storage of firearms. My what if question is, does that put conflict in a bill we're going to hear later, House File number 2609 on straw buyer? Is that the loophole for someone who purchases the gun and then reports it stolen?
Representative Herr.
Madam Speaker, Representative Whitty, I'm not quite sure I understand your question about what the actual loophole is. So if you could maybe provide an explanation of that, because this bill actually works in conjunction with the safe storage bill.
Thank you. Yep.
Representative Whitty.
Thank you. So the part that I'm looking at is if I purchased a gun for someone that was illegal to possess, and I did it through the straw buyer purchase, but know that that's a crime, I report the gun stolen, and the person that was illegal to have the gun has the gun. So it takes the responsibility out of my hand and will make it, you've just granted them immunity so they cannot be charged under the 2609.
Sorry, Representative Whitty, I was distracted. Representative Herr.
Madam Speaker, Representative Whitty. So I had to think about that one a little bit, and I think maybe one of my prosecutor colleagues could maybe better answer this, but that is precisely what this bill is trying to prevent, is someone being able to buy a gun and then just report it as lost or stolen, and that's how straw purchases have been happening. And so you would be immune from the safe storage piece of it, but it doesn't protect you from actually breaking the law. So but if you had safely stored it, then you would have immunity from the safe storage of it.
Representative Whitty.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So under my example, if I'm the straw buyer and I gave it to the person that shouldn't have the ability to have the gun, and I reported it right after that to law enforcement, does that grant me immunity so I cannot be prosecuted for the sale?
Representative Herr.
Madam Speaker, Representative Whitty, again, it is just immunity from the safe storage of it.
Representative Whitty.
Thank you. That was just the one part that popped out at me with the immunity part. And, obviously, when I was a police officer, I took many reports of stolen guns from people. And the first thing I did was I would go into our dispatch center, and if it had a serial number, get it reported into the database. And the reason I did that was you have a stolen gun out there, and I would hate for it to be used against one of my partners or in the community. So there was a mechanism in place to have that out there. So thank you for the questions, Representative Herr. As I was looking at it, the immunity part I thought was going to be in conflict with the House file. So thank you.
The member from Todd, Representative Wiener. Oh, I'm sorry, the member from Anoka, Representative Engen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And members, coming into my first session last year, I thought that there'd be an opportunity to find some common ground in actually addressing the epidemic of gun violence that's occurring here in our state. But this is just another gun bill, another gun debate, and another missed opportunity to actually address meaningful legislation that can curtail the epidemic of gun violence that we are all experiencing. I see some folks in the gallery that would 100% agree with me and with many folks on this side of the aisle, believe it or not, that we want to address gun violence. We need to. It is occurring more and more every single day, and we're almost growing immune to the news of another story of another tragedy. And, you know, I take a look at 2023. The Sentencing Guidelines Commission data shows us that it is an epidemic. It's not just a word that we're throwing out there and trying to be hyperbolic. It's very real. We had a record 1,805 cases of gun violence in 2023, under the DFL trifecta, mind you. 30% of those 1,805 cases of gun violence ended in a conviction with a mandatory minimum sentence. 30%, 3 out of 10. 41% of those 1,805 cases were either A, not charged, B, they were dismissed, or C, mandatory minimum sentence was waived altogether. That's a big deal. That's where this gun violence and the epidemic of gun violence is all stemming from. We're incentivizing the behavior. We're not criminalizing it. In fact, instead of actually addressing that data that I just gave to you, we're going to go backwards on it. We're going to actually do the opposite and say that we should do away with the mandatory minimum sentences for criminals convicted of gun violence. Don't believe me? Take a look at House File 4277. You guys authored it, and I'm getting really, really sick and tired of having to listen to this one-sided false monopoly on compassion that is claimed by the other side when it comes to gun violence. You don't get it anymore. You don't get to bring forward pieces of legislation that criminalize victims and say, look, we're addressing gun violence. No, you're not. You're doing the exact opposite. You're saying, gun criminals, you're good to go. Go do it again. Because in Minnesota, we'll let you just keep doing it. There's no penalty, no sentence. You'll never step foot in a jail cell. And if you do, sorry, we'll get you out of here as soon as possible and with some wraparound services. This is getting ridiculous. Why don't we actually address the real issue? Instead of having to debate these tiny, minuscule bills that at most do nothing other than criminalize victims, and at best make it a little bit harder for somebody to actually want to have a gun in the first place because it's another onerous hoop jumping process that they have to jump through. Why don't we actually address the root cause of the issue? Somebody, please, from the other side of the aisle, we want to address this. Let's talk in the back room, and let's figure out a way where we can actually get to the heart of the issue of what's hurting Minnesotans every single day in our communities. Thank you.
The member from Itasca, Representative Igo.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So we've heard a lot of discussion already this afternoon going into the evening. And I just want to speak a little about what I think it means as we're legislators and we're talking about legislation in front of us. You know, the decisions we debate and that we talk about on this House floor don't just affect the now, they affect the future. They affect the future generations in 5 and 10 years, 20, 30, 40 years. The things we talk about and discuss have meaning. So when we're talking about a bill like House File 601 and what that's going to mean for law-abiding citizens, that gives me a lot of pause and a lot of concern, because we do need to think twice and act once about what that decision is going to be. So when I thought about who this is going to affect, it dawned on me that this is going to affect the most law-abiding citizens in our state. The people in my district, the people of this state who are gun owners, are some of the most law-abiding people I know. So then I look at this legislation, what is that going to mean for them? And that's where the concern grows even more. Now you tell a law-abiding citizen who's a gun owner that if they're not, making sure to check their basement gun cabinet every day on the day, they could be under threat to be persecuted and charged. I know a lot of people that would give them a lot of anxiety. That would worry them. That wouldn't give them peace of mind. Why? Because they don't want to break the law. They want to do everything possible. They want to be upstanding members of our society. But then why are we drafting legislation to put our thumb on them and say, you are the problem? And unfortunately, that's what this legislation is doing in front of us. If we wanted to get at the problem that we're talking about right now, we would actually be prosecuting criminals. We would be holding people accountable. We would make sure that we couldn't prosecute under statutory minimums. That's what would give people a peace of mind. We would get at the root cause. We would stop the shootings and the violence down here that's in the metro. Those are things we got to get at. And we could be addressing stuff like that instead in a bipartisan, common sense way that would have both sides of the aisle working together on that. But we're not. Instead, we're going for the most law-abiding people in our society. That's a problem. The line in the legislation, reasonably should have known. What kind of precedent does that state for the future of proceedings around cases like this, or what's it going to expand to next? Reasonably should have known. A lot of my colleagues tonight have talked about, you were away from home for a week. You came home, you didn't notice anything. All of a sudden, when you're going to go hunting in a few weeks, you notice, oh my gosh, my shotgun isn't there. Now, every law-abiding gun owner is going to go report that, but should they have reasonably known when they got home? Or did they reasonably know when they went to check their gun cabinet because it wasn't a safe, secure location? It's that kind of discrepancy and misunderstanding that's not in the legislation that should scare every single one of us as legislators that we need to be thinking twice and acting once about the bills we put in front of this chamber. We have to do better. And I challenge all of us that when we look at legislation to not think about the moment in which we're doing it, but to think about who it's going to affect for the next 5, 10, and 15 years after this. What precedents are we going to set by doing this? Is this going to result in better things happening in the state of Minnesota or worse things? And so far, based on the discussion tonight that I've been listening to, we're not going to see better things happen. In fact, we're probably going to see worse things happen to the people in our society that want to make sure and do the right thing and uphold the law. If we wanted to make sure and reduce the crimes that we are seeing, some of my colleagues said it best. If you think criminals are about to start reporting lost weapons and lost guns, then you're wrong. We can't even hold criminals accountable. That's a situation we need to be addressing right now. We need to make sure that crime isn't allowed in this state, that there's not going to be a free pass. Accountability is what makes communities great. It's what makes our state great. But by passing legislation that's going to honestly target a law-abiding gun owner and make them a criminal in the event of a crime is not how we lift people up. That's not how we uphold the law. That's not how we stop crime. So I'm going to encourage that we all vote no on this, and goes back to my earlier statements. We, as a legislative body, I really should say the majority, since you're running the place down here, I deeply encourage you, as we're approaching these final weeks of session, to start thinking about what the policy that you're putting in front of this chamber is going to do for the generations after we no longer sit here. Because unfortunately, a lot of the legislation we saw last year and this year is approaching the now, the instant gratification of, look, we did something. We gotta stop acting like that. We have to start acting like adults and realizing that every decision we make has consequences. Passing a bill like this will have consequences for the people that uphold our laws and respect the institution of our state. We cannot turn them into the criminals. What we should do is prosecute the actual criminals. Vote no.
The member from Todd, Representative Wiener.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sorry for my being in the back there for a second. You know, when this bill is discussed, there's a lot of things that are being talked about, a lot of different ideas. And Marion Rarick had, Representative Rarick, had some points about stolen items. And are we prosecuting things the same way? Are we treating them the same? So my thought was cars. Are we turning people who have their cars stolen into criminals? So to compare some numbers, in Chicago, 80 cars per day stolen. Absolutely amazing. Should we turn those people who have just had a piece of their personal items stolen? should we turn them into criminals? You have not reported the theft of your vehicle, therefore you are a criminal. In Minneapolis, a woman's car was stolen 3 times in 6 months. Should we prosecute her for each time her vehicle was stolen because she didn't report it in a timely manner? That vehicle can be just as dangerous, if not more, than a weapon. At the same time, a vehicle can be locked in a garage, at a cabin, someplace where you don't have access to it. Someone steals it. Reasonable knowledge. Are we going to prosecute that person because of a criminal that stole from them? When you put it into a comparison like that, it doesn't quite make sense, does it? But for some reason, when we talk about guns, somehow it makes sense. And yet the danger of stolen cars, we've seen it. How many accidents have happened in the state of Minnesota, primarily in the cities here? As a matter of fact, Rochester, Minneapolis, St. Paul are all in the top areas, cities, for having cars stolen. Not a single piece of legislation that's saying we need to turn those people into criminals. Cars stolen since 2019 are up 30%, much to the statistics that were given before about guns. We've seen this rash of crimes perpetrated, but this bill is going to turn the victims into criminals. Why would we do this? Makes absolutely no sense. Let's flip the scenario again. What if you're the if you're the victim of identity theft, but you didn't find out soon enough? You didn't turn in your credit card soon enough, and now you are a criminal. None of this makes sense. It's an attack again on our justice system, first of all. We don't take a victim of a crime and make them into a criminal. It's absolutely insane. If we don't do it for other things, why would we do it for this? Let's be honest, it's because it's a gun. And the only time that we look at turning a law-abiding citizen into a criminal is when guns are involved. We don't do it for cars. We don't do it for other issues. We shouldn't do it for this. Vote no on this bill.
The member from Olmsted, Representative Quam.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And would the author of the bill yield?
She will yield, Representative Quam.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. What I'm curious about is if somebody observes the theft of their firearm, what exceptions does the bill give to them being charged or guilty of an offense if they don't report within 48 hours?
Representative Herr.
Madam Speaker, Representative Quam, my apologies. I spilled water all over my desk. Just give me a second here. Representative Quam, could you repeat the question, please? My apologies.
Representative Quam.
Most certainly. It took me, I was surprised by the speaker calling on me. I was enthralled by the discussion. And once again, what exception is there in the bill if a person observes the theft of their firearm but doesn't report within 48 hours?
Representative Herr.
Madam Speaker, Representative Quam, I think that might be a better question maybe for our prosecutors that are here, because if you did not follow the law, you would get prosecuted for not following the law, just like any other law that you break. So if you maybe want to direct that question to Representative Pinto.
Representative Quam.
Madam Speaker, I would like the insight of the author as to what exceptions are included in the bill in regards to someone I'm not getting into the tricky question of, reasonable. No, I'm taking the assumption that the person witnessed it, so there's no reasonable doubt or whatever play on words you have of them realizing the gun's been stolen, but they do not report within 48 hours, does the bill contain any exception? If the author would yield.
She will yield. Representative Herr.
Madam Speaker, Representative Quam, I don't believe that you're trying to be tricky with this question. I want to give you a good answer because I am not a prosecutor. I can't answer the question for you, just like if you were to ask me the question about how law enforcement is actually going to report this into the NIBR system, I can tell you that because I've actually done the work on that. I actually think that if you want a really good answer as to how the proceedings are, if you know that your firearm was stolen or lost and you did not report it, then law enforcement and our legal process is what you should be asking for. And Representative Pinto looks like he was ready to answer the question for you. So I don't believe that you're trying to be gotcha or tricky question. I want to make sure you get the answer that you're looking for that is factual based in our legal system.
Representative Quam.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I didn't want to get into the, off the bill language itself, because we all understand prosecutorial discretion. We've seen examples of that being used to not charge almost any crime. But I was interested in what the author specifically thought, well, in these occurrences, we want to make sure that the victim couldn't be charged with a crime, because I'm old-fashioned. I believe we should try and protect victims as much as we can, because I thought of several examples where a person could see and witness the theft and not report in 48 hours. One example is if they're off at a hunting cabin, no cell reception, and somebody comes in when at the end of the day they're eating and takes all their guns. And if they've got any vehicles, those are gone, and it takes them 2 days to hike out to find someplace they can get to a phone and report it. I would think that would be a natural exception. Another natural exception is you observe it, and as you surprise the person, they whack you on the side of the head, and you're unconscious for a couple days. That happens. Or you're injured in a struggle, and you are put into a drug-induced coma to help you heal. And again, you're not able to communicate until after 48 hours or longer.
Can't do that.
Or you have amnesia from being struck in the head. They're unusual things, but they aren't things that never happen. So if I'm writing a bill that's going to charge a victim, I'm going to think and ask a group of people to think, what are the possible situations that we could make sure the victim isn't charged? I'm hearing from the author that that isn't part of the bill, and it's understandable that we have a large entity of statutes on the book that might have some exceptions, but I'm not as trusting on them being covered by some other part of the code. I'm feeling obligated to think about how we can protect the victims. And I don't see this contained within the actual language of the bill, and that gives me pause. Because my first priority are the criminals. Now, actually, my first priority is how are we protecting people? Second priority is criminals. I don't even know if I have in my top 10 how we can punish the victim for something we think they should be doing with no exceptions in the statute. I hope we vote no, and if this comes back, that it comes back with the pre-thought to avoid unintended consequences and damage to the victims. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The member from Meeker, Representative Erdahl.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. And I'm just going to relay a short memo sent out by the Minnesota Sheriff's Association that I think encapsulates a lot of this discussion. Imposing severe penalties on individuals who may have unintentionally violated storage protocol or who have encountered extenuating circumstances is unjust and counterproductive to fostering a safer firearms culture.
The member from Morrison, Representative Schultz.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I appreciate it. This has been a very productive debate, and I think that a lot of questions have been answered in the course of our conversation this evening about House File 601. But let me just say that I think that there are actually a lot of unanswered questions that remain. And if we're going to be passing any additional bills this legislative session, I sure hope that they can earn bipartisan support and that they can also keep from irresponsible legislation that, frankly, doesn't properly notify and educate Minnesotans. And if there's one thing that I heard since we came back, so during the course of the interim, during the last year, it was that Minnesotans were hearing about immense new mandates. Mandates upon mandates. New mandates on individuals, new mandates on businesses, new mandates on schools. And a lot of those mandates passed by this legislature, despite a $20 billion budget surplus, a lot of those mandates passed on to people were wholly unfunded. Unfunded mandates. And why do I bring that up when we're talking about a bill that is criminalizing victims? The reason I bring that up is because Minnesotans, honestly, the vast majority, don't pay attention to what we do here. And I know that's going to burst a lot of our bubbles to hear that people don't listen to us every Monday night and every Thursday night. And they might catch one blip on the news one night when a bill is ultimately signed into law by the governor. But what we have here with this bill is something that's going to place an additional burden and an additional mandate on people who are law-abiding in this state. It's going to criminalize the victims. And I know that this bill has been passed in other places and been a part of the radical liberal agenda in other states, and certainly it's arrived here to Minnesota. Why? Because it's an idea that originated in California. Can we be all that surprised by that? But what's been interesting is we have debated tonight and discussed, I think there's been a lot of questions because law-abiding gun owners in this state and the people who would be the victims of this new mandate is that, frankly, there's no way for them to really know that this new bill is going to be on the books. And what we heard from the additional new mandates passed last session was that as it related to things like earned sick and safe time and paid family medical leave and a whole bunch of, actually 65 new mandates on education and on local school districts, that a lot of these things were unfunded. And when I look at this bill, many Minnesotans, law-abiding gun owners, are not going to have much for notification to know that this law has been put on the books. So if sometime in the future, after August 1st of this year, someone has their firearm stolen, how are they supposed to know that this law is even on the books? There's nothing to provide for that. So I wanted to ask, would the author of the bill yield?
She will yield. Representative Schultz.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And Representative Herr, when you've taken a look at this legislation, when you have looked at what other states have done, I mentioned that it's been passed in California, and I know that many other states, in fact, from my own research, it appears like this has been a part of the conversation in 14 or 15 other states and Washington, D.C. In any of those instances, did they provide for proper education to law-abiding gun owners to ensure that people knew this law when it was placed on the books?
Representative Herr.
Madam Speaker, Representative Schultz. Thank you, my apologies. So you are correct. 14 states, including District of Columbia, and radical states like Ohio and Virginia have passed similar laws. So it is true that this is not new. This is not new law. This is not radical. This has been passed before. So what I can tell you is that I actually had conversations with both DPS and with BCA, and they talked about how they would work with law enforcement to ensure that they understood sort of the new reporting requirements. And I also understand that in these different, like every single law that we pass, you're right, a lot of people aren't sitting around watching what we're doing here on the House floor in the Senate chamber. And so, you know, like every law, whether it is wage theft laws or whether it is that somebody has to provide earn sick and save time, people don't know these laws are getting passed, and it is upon the agencies and the entities in which interface with the public to let them know about this information. And so when I asked DPS and BCA, they did tell me that they would be the ones to be providing the education with law enforcement, and then the entities at law enforcement facing individuals and any entity that actually is interfacing with the general public who actually touch this area, they would be the entities that would be responsible for ensuring that people are aware. Just like in every other situation where DEED has to be responsible, when Department of Human Rights has to be responsible, in which like it is our agencies that are the ones that get the information out to people.
Representative Schultz.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And so what you just heard was that there is nothing inside this bill to provide for education for the unfunded mandate of new education for law-abiding gun owners, and the education that Minnesotans should have so they don't become the victims, and so that we're not criminalizing our law-abiding gun owners in Minnesota. Representative Herr, to what you just stated, you know, there is an appropriation in this bill for $36,000, but ultimately it has nothing to do with notifying Minnesotans about this new mandate on them. Would Representative Herr yield?
She will yield. Representative Schultz.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And Representative Herr, when I'm looking at this bill, I think that piece is really very lacking. When we're thinking about the implications to Minnesotans, we can't rely upon the fact that they're going to see this one news story if this bill were to be signed into law, and that be the only thing that law-abiding gun owners of this state need to be aware of. Minnesotans wouldn't know. You mentioned a moment ago that, not a moment ago, but at the beginning of the debate tonight, that there's a lot of data behind all of this. And so how many Minnesotans own guns or own firearms today?
Representative Herr.
Madam Speaker, Representative Schultz, actually I do have that data, and because I spilled water all over my things, I can't find it for you, but I will actually get you that data because we do know how many firearm owners there are in the state of Minnesota.
Representative Schultz.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And so with that, Representative Herr, if we do know that information, that isn't something that I looked up prior to engaging in this conversation with you. But my question for you, Representative Herr, if you will continue to yield.
She will yield. Representative Schultz.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Herr, would be what obligation, what responsibility does the state have to provide the knowledge of this new piece of legislation that could make them the criminal?
Representative Herr.
Madam Speaker, Representative Schultz, so I just want to first clarify one thing here is that I continue to hear talking about how we're criminalizing people, and I just want to be very clear that this bill actually doesn't do that. A petty misdemeanor, which is by definition is not a crime. If you look at statute 609.02, subdivision 4A, it actually literally states that a petty misdemeanor is not a crime. And so I just want to make sure to clear up for the record that it is not a crime. We are not criminalizing people, but if you do have your gun stolen a second time or lost or stolen, maybe you need to start reevaluating, should you be a gun owner because you can't seem to be able to track your firearm. And so I think that that is really important for us just to clarify that. And I think that the second point, and I'm so sorry, Representative Schultz, I don't remember the second part of your question, if maybe you could repeat that, because I do want to state that we do have data that shows that a quarter of guns that are lost or stolen are never reported, and that's not being reported by law-abiding citizens. That's a quarter of guns lost or stolen are not being reported.
Representative Schultz.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and Representative Herr. I'd gladly get back to the question that I asked. And my question for you, Representative Herr, is what responsibility does the state have to educate law-abiding gun owners about a bill like this one?
Representative Herr.
Madam Speaker, Representative Schultz, the state has the exact same obligation it does in every bill that we passed off of out of the legislature here. But you know, I would love to work with you. When I actually had introduced this bill, no Republican ever came to me, and Representative Engen was correct that this should be a bipartisan effort. Republicans and Democrats own guns. I own a gun. I own two now. And so there should be a bipartisan support legislation, but no Republican came to talk to me, just Representative Nadeau. And when Representative Nadeau came to me, and I'm not going to put words in his mouth because I'm not going to ask him to yield because I'm already yielding, but I said to him, I would love to have conversation with you, and if you have an amendment that makes this bill better, I will take it. And he and I had that discussion. I am, for those who have worked with me, always very open to having a discussion. So if you want to work with me and saying, how do you want to do additional funding on top of what we are already responsible for when we pass laws in the state of Minnesota here, I'd love to have that discussion with you, because the $36,000 is just for the reporting. I did specifically ask BCA and DPS, how do we ensure that our law enforcement entities know that this law is changing? They said, we will work with them. And I asked them, is there additional cost? And they said, we already do training. We will incorporate this into our training. I did ask the questions, but if you have brilliant ideas of what we can do to increase funding for public service, I'd love to work with you on that.
Representative Schultz.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, Representative Herr. What I can tell you is that this state cannot afford any more unaffordable and extremely expensive and irresponsible legislation to be passing. And in addition, when I'm thinking about irresponsible legislation, I'm thinking about legislation that would come into effect on August 1st of this year and criminalize law-abiding gun owners. That's what we're talking about right now. And so far in my own research, Representative Herr, what I can tell you is I haven't been through each one of the 14 or 15 states, but I've been through a few. And I actually think that this has been a point that has been missed. I truly believe that this is a point that has been missed, that there is no education about a new mandate on law-abiding gun owners on the way that they have to report a lost or stolen firearm. And if that isn't taken into consideration, and granted, this legislative session is not over. This bill has not reached its final point. And so my encouragement to you and to the body and to the members seeking to pass this piece of legislation is that I believe that you owe it to the people of Minnesota, to the law-abiding people of Minnesota, that they understand a new mandate that is upon them, because they don't watch us every night. They don't. They don't. And so would Representative Herr yield to another question?
She will yield. Representative Schultz.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. An earlier question was raised tonight about how you, well, just the general question was about 48 hours for an individual who notices that a firearm is lost or stolen, and then how local law enforcement has 7 days, 7 days to kind of navigate handing over that information to law enforcement up the chain from them. How did you arrive at 48 hours versus the standards found in other states?
Representative Herr.
Madam Speaker, Representative Schultz, so 48 hours, we looked at actually all of the other states, and I'm going to share with you that a lost or stolen firearm in other states, unfortunately I do too much homework, so I have a lot of paper here. So these laws, so Massachusetts, Ohio, and the District of Columbia require immediate reporting. Hawaii, New York, Rhode Island, and Washington require reporting within 24 hours. New Jersey, within 36 hours. Virginia, 48 hours. Connecticut, Illinois, Maryland, and Oregon within 72 hours. And California, Colorado, Michigan within 5 days. And Delaware is within a week. And so looking at what other states have done, no, we just decided 48 hours based on what has been already done in other states would be reasonable. And we also looked at the outcomes. And so we decided that 48 hours would probably be the most reasonable. But again, many, many states already do this. And we did not go with the immediate reporting that some states already do right now. We think that is too restrictive. And there's a whole bunch that do 24 hours. We think that 48 hours is a reasonable compromise.
Representative Schultz.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, I certainly would argue with the decision that has been made, at least thus far, and maybe you can find more changes to this bill before it ultimately becomes law, Representative Herr. But when I look at it, there's no reason why Minnesotans should be held to a standard that government entities who are receiving funding, why that standard should be different. You know, the state that has passed legislation most similar to this, in my opinion, is probably Michigan. Theirs is 5 days. Michigan, Minnesota, we're both Great Lakes states. They're probably the most similar to us. So I don't know how you arrived. I don't agree with how you arrived at 48 hours and why the standard is different for government entities to be passing this information versus citizens, especially when you are providing no education to the people over this new law, this new mandate onto people. Madam Speaker, would Representative Herr yield to a question?
She will. Representative Schultz.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and Representative Herr. Are the local law enforcement entities or is the Department of Public Safety supposed to absorb the cost of education to the Minnesotans impacted by this law?
Representative Herr.
Speaker Hortman and Representative Schultz, I did just want to address from your last point before. I also want to be very clear that House File 601 would establish a reporting requirement like Virginia's law, not Michigan, not the other states that you might have talked to. And it aligns with the federal requirement for licensed gun dealers to report lost or theft within 48 hours. That's a federal law that's already in place right now. We're just aligning with that. We thought that based on what all the other states were doing, it was the most reasonable, and it aligns with the federal law in which licensed gun dealers already have to comply with. So just so that you're aware that you have that information. So about absorbing the cost. So I did ask that, like I said, I had that conversation with DPS and BCA. The $36,000 cost of it is actually to create a new supplemental reporting into the NIBR system, which is the National Incident-Based Reporting System, which is reported to the FBI. And so that reporting is done and by officers and by agencies that are collecting this information. They told me that there would be additional costs for this, that they were already doing trainings, and so they would not need additional cost in order to do that. And so I'm only going off of what I've been told, but like I said, it is the cost for that is for a new reporting in the system, and I just want to make sure that this body understands that this new reporting in the NIBR system is not new. We have, anytime where law requires additional reporting and tracking to the federal government that we currently do not, that we are adding new, becomes a supplemental. We do that with homicides as well, and so this $36,000 is for creating that new reporting, and for the additional education, I was told it would not be burdensome for them.
Representative Schultz.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and Representative Herr. You have a future as an auctioneer, and you and I will have to talk about how we're going to make that a reality. But when we get down to the brass tacks of this bill, the facts of the matter are that law-abiding gun owners in this state are not going to receive notification beyond what's on a local news report or whatever comes out from the House of Representatives on August 1st of this year. And thus, when a violent criminal enters their home and comes to burglarize their home, they are not going to know, and they may be fully unaware of a new law that's on the books that will make them the criminal. Not for the storage of their weapon, but for the fact that they are the victim. They, who had their firearms stolen from them, are now going to receive the penalty of a petty misdemeanor up to a gross misdemeanor, and the additional fines and costs that make living in Minnesota even more unaffordable. That's what this bill does. And it's frustrating. It's frustrating for law-abiding Minnesotans that violent criminals are let off the hook, that violent criminals see their sentences lowered, that violent criminals and felons in this state have been granted the right to vote and vote on legislation just like this. That's frustrating for Minnesotans, and it's wholly irresponsible. It's wholly irresponsible. So we should vote no on this bill and say no to the radical ideas of California.
The member from Chisago, Representative New Brindley.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So we hear lots of bills on the House floor in relation to gun ownership. And for years, we have heard bills that do virtually nothing to stem the tide of gun crimes, but do a lot to punish law-abiding gun owners. This bill here takes a new direction that is frankly shocking, and that is actually criminalizing the victims of crime. This one is particularly wild. Usually we stop at penalizing law-abiding gun owners. This time we're actually going to criminalize law-abiding gun owners. The conversation about this today has been really interesting, and I thought that I would talk about a couple of these things that have come up. First of all, I want to clarify, you know, we were told and read a letter actually from MPPOA in support of this. I think it should be made very, very clear that MPPOA this year has not indicated their support of this bill. In fact, they've made it clear that they are neutral on this bill. They are not supportive of the bill. That's important because we should all be working from the same place, and we should be very, very honest about what is out. But I've got an email right here. So that's number one. Let's make sure that we are all on the same page. I think it is interesting. In fact, I made note of this. Representative Whitty had actually leaned over and talked to me about this immunity piece a little bit. And then not 5 minutes later, Representative Johnson brought up this immunity piece while he was making his remarks. And I think it's really interesting that independent of one another, some of the law enforcement officers, the people who understand the law and have to deal with this day after day after day, these guys immediately connected those dots, that we've got a problem with this immunity piece. And this is what I would add to it. You know, with straw purchases, those are incredibly difficult to prosecute. We don't always have a trail that makes it obvious like we do in one of the current cases, current high-profile cases that is likely to be prosecuted soon. We don't usually have a trail, so these are really difficult crimes to prosecute. So when it comes to this immunity piece, where it's difficult to prosecute now, we're just giving an additional out to those straw purchasers. That's what's happening. We're giving an additional out because let's say they purchase a gun for someone else as a straw purchase. Well, there's not likely a paper trail of that. People don't know about it, so they report the gun stolen and it's done. They are now immune. They are now immune. Absent, like I said, absent a paper trail, a text message trail, absent that kind of thing, it's done. They have now completely protected themselves of prosecution under this bill. They have now guaranteed immunity for themselves. That's a problem, folks. That needs to be dealt with. And it's fascinating to me that, like I said, multiple law enforcement officers who were not talking to each other, they picked up on that. They knew the problem with that piece of this bill. Thankfully, we have law enforcement officers serving in this body who can pick up on that stuff. So thank you to you. I thought it was interesting as Representative Quam was asking, what happens when a crime victim doesn't report within 48 hours? And they know, are there any exceptions to that? And I don't know why we would have to ask a prosecutor in this room. Everyone in this room is a lawmaker. We can all read the language on the page. And no, there are no exceptions. The only exception in this bill at all is the immunity you receive on safe storage. That's it. So no, if you do not report your firearm as stolen, there are no exceptions, Representative Quam, so I'm glad that you brought that up. Now, I happen to have never been convicted of a petty misdemeanor or any other crime, thankfully. Certainly not a felony or something more serious. However, I can't imagine if I was convicted of a petty misdemeanor, I can't imagine that I would not feel like a criminal. So I guess we can split hairs and say the strict language of the underlying law regarding a petty misdemeanor is that you're not technically a criminal, but I don't know, you're subject to a fine. You're subject to a fine of $300. You are being punished. You are being punished. And I would point out, this fine, this $300 fine, let's not forget that that leaves a disproportionate impact on folks with less means, with fewer means. Because a $300 fine to someone with means, probably not a big deal. They can absorb that in their family budget. But a $300 fine for someone with fewer means, for somebody who's just trying to make their ends meet every month, you better believe $300 is a big deal. Whether they are technically a criminal or not, they are certainly being punished for being victims to the tune of $300. We are punishing victims. Again, we've spent a lot of time in this chamber debating punishing law-abiding citizens and putting requirements on law-abiding citizens. I think this is the first time that I'm aware of that we have actually taken that leap to criminalizing the victims, to punishing the victims. It's interesting, I understand that it came up in committee that this language about reasonably should have known. And now, last year we passed well, I use the term we loosely. Last year the Democrats passed red flag laws. And in order for someone to get their firearms back under red flag laws, they have to show clear and convincing evidence that they're safe to have those firearms. Clear and convincing evidence. However, as the victim of a crime, you should just reasonably should have known. As the victim, you should reasonably know. That's our standard for you. Doesn't have to be clear and convincing for the victim. Nope, they just reasonably should have known. That's what we're doing to victims in this bill. That's what we're doing to victims. It's wild. And again, we're talking about firearms. I'm trying to get some data, interestingly. You know, we heard a statistic about how many guns are lost or stolen and not reported. You know what I can guarantee? I can guarantee that 100% of guns that are lost and stolen by criminals are not reported. That's what I can guarantee to you. 100% of guns lost or stolen by criminals are not reported. So once again, all we're doing is criminalizing victims, real, legitimate victims, people who have been violated, people who have had their homes broken into and been violated. Those are the people we are punishing with this bill. Those are literally the only people we are punishing with this bill. I have a brother-in-law who lives in London, and their house actually has been burglarized 4 times now. It's pretty commonplace in London. They've been burglarized like 4 times. That is being terrorized in your own home. That's what that is. And frankly, imagine if what folks steal are your firearms and leave you without the one thing that helps you feel safe in your home, that helps you feel like you have a defense when someone comes into your home uninvited, intending to do you harm. These are the folks who have been terrorized, and these are the folks we are punishing with this bill. Imagine that they've come in and stolen your firearms, and what? You're grabbing a knife out of the drawer? That's all you've got left in your house? That's what you've got to defend yourself with? A steak knife from the kitchen? But we're going to fine you $300. We're going to fine you $300. I know a lot of folks, in fact, I know of an incident just recently. Victims of these kinds of crimes do not feel safe in their own homes. Often they don't go back to their homes for a long time, a week. But now we're going to victimize them again by telling them this is their fault? By fining them $300? I don't know, maybe I should have looked through the language more closely. Can the law-abiding gun owner recoup that fine from the actual criminal? Can they recoup that $300 fine from the person who actually broke into their home? From the person who actually stole their property? From the person who actually terrorized them in their own home? Boy, I should have been on top of it. That would have been a reasonable amendment to this bill. That the victim should at least be able to recoup that fine from the actual criminal. But no, that's not here. That's not here. All we're doing today is criminalizing victims. That is all we are doing with this bill. it's been noted several times that, frankly, law-abiding citizens, law-abiding gun owners, victims of crimes already report them. Frankly, they call 911. They call 911. They're not waiting. In fact, I'll be honest, we had this situation a couple of years ago. When my brother passed away, we were very concerned that his firearm was missing. As it turns out, it was locked safely in his safe, but we didn't have access to the safe, so it took us a while to figure that out. But the first thing we did was report to law enforcement officers that, hey, we've got some concerns. We knew his phone was missing. We couldn't find that anywhere. And frankly, we couldn't find his firearm. So the first thing we did was let law enforcement officers know. Do you know why I did that? Because I am a law-abiding citizen, and that's what you do. You notify law enforcement when these things happen. But I guess, I don't know that I did that within 48 hours. However, I could have reasonably known that within 48 hours. Maybe. I could have assumed it. We could have looked for that firearm and made sure we knew where it was. I don't know that it was within 48 hours. So guess what? You just criminalized me. You just turned me into the criminal. That's what this bill does. That's what this bill does. Once again, it blows my mind. I was going to say, once again, we're spending our time on trying to do something with firearms that we just go after law-abiding citizens. Do folks know that gun crimes are some of the most under-prosecuted crimes in the state of Minnesota? We do not prosecute gun crimes. The Hennepin County Attorney is not going after gun crimes. We don't prosecute them. And instead of in this body insisting that our prosecutors and our judicial system hold folks accountable for committing crimes, instead we're going to criminalize victims. Instead, we're going to look at the folks who reasonably should have known. I don't even know what that means. That is not, that is not a reasonable standard for lawmakers to pass, frankly. But those are the people we're going to criminalize. Those are the people who we're going to say, pay up. Pay up. $300. We're going to re-victimize you. You have already been the victim of a crime, and now you are also going to be a victim of the state of Minnesota. Interestingly, again, law-abiding gun owners, they typically do report when a firearm has been stolen. The ones who don't report these thefts are the ones who are not supposed to have a gun to begin with. In fact, I won't ask her to yield. I'm waiting to get some information back. I won't ask her to yield, but I would be really interested to know of that 25% of guns that are lost or stolen that are not reported. I'd be very interested to know how many of those guns are owned by people who own those guns legally. Because I actually bet it's a pretty small number. I bet it's a pretty small number. Because that's just not normal behavior. That's not what normal people do. normal people, people who obey the law, they also trust the law. They also trust their law enforcement officers. And so when they are burglarized, when they have had their personal property stolen, that's what they do. They report it. The people who don't report it are the people who are engaged in nefarious activities. They're the people who don't own their firearms legally to begin with. Or perhaps they are persons who are not allowed to have firearms. There's a lot of folks in the state of Minnesota who are not supposed to have guns that have them. But again, we don't want to prosecute those folks. We don't want to hold them accountable. Instead, we're going to hold the victims accountable. We're going to hold victims accountable for what criminals do. Because that's who we are now in Minnesota. That's what we do. Last year, Representative Wiener was making the comparison to auto theft. Although, interestingly, Democrats also held manufacturers accountable last year for auto theft. Again, let's not hold criminals accountable. Let's hold somebody else accountable. And you know why I think that is? It's because you can access these folks. You know what I mean? When we, and again, I keep saying when the Democrats essentially criminalized auto manufacturers last year, it's because they can access auto manufacturers. Well, hey, we can stick it to them. We can show the people that we're doing something for them. No, you're not. That bill did not put a single criminal behind bars for stealing cars. Not one. Just like this bill here does not put a single criminal behind bars for stealing firearms. Something we should consider an extraordinarily serious crime, stealing firearms. But this bill, House File 601 before us right now, does not put a single criminal behind bars for stealing a firearm. It does not impose a single penalty for a criminal who steals a firearm. It does not impose a single fine on a criminal for stealing a firearm. This bill before us does none of those things. It does not touch the criminal. The only thing House File 601 does is criminalize the victim. It turns the victim into the crime into the criminal. Instead of fining the criminal, we're going to fine the victim. Again, this is a new low in this body. This is a new low. We can go back through the decades and actually see all kinds of this kind of thing, particularly when it comes to women. We used to really like to re-victimize women by using the law and by using the courts and by minimizing women when they were victimized. In fact, frankly, sadly, for most of the history of our country, until recent decades, that's what we chose to do through the law, is re-victimize women. This bill victimizes women. This bill says to the young woman who lives by herself in South Minneapolis that if someone steals your gun, we are going to hold you accountable for it. We are going to charge you with a petty misdemeanor. We are going to fine you $300. And I want you to imagine that young woman has that firearm to help her feel safe in her own home. That's why she has it, to help her feel safe in her own home, to make sure that she is not defenseless against someone who breaks into her home. That's why she has that firearm. It's not for fun. It's not to feel cool. It is to feel safe. That is why she owns that firearm. And now, someone breaks into her home and steals that firearm. First of all, let's acknowledge the terror that occurs when that happens. The terror of that level of victimization, knowing that someone is in your home, uninvited. That's who we're talking about right now. And that young woman, in her fear, in her terror, probably going home to stay with mom and dad for a while because she's too scared to be in her own home anymore. Maybe she doesn't think about it, and maybe it takes her 3 days or 4 days or 5 days to report that firearm stolen. Too late. Too late. You're the criminal now. You're the criminal now. We're going to ignore the terror that you have experienced. We are going to ignore the crime that you have experienced. And instead, we're going to fine you. We're going to hold you accountable for that theft, for that burglary in your own home. That is what this bill does. This bill does not do a thing to go after a criminal. But it does a lot of heavy lifting in turning a law-abiding citizen into a criminal. I cannot imagine why anyone would support this kind of legislation. I cannot imagine why anyone would choose to victimize a victim in this way. I cannot imagine why anyone would vote to criminalize a victim. This one is easy.
The member from Crow Wing, Representative Heinzman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Would Representative Herr yield to a question?
She will yield. Representative Heinzman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Herr, I don't sit on the Public Safety Committee. This didn't come to Environment. I did have an opportunity to potentially hear a little bit about what's going on in this bill and Ways and Means, but unfortunately I think the day that this bill came to Ways and Means, there was other committees that were meeting at the same time, so I missed my chance. My question was on how the people of Minnesota would potentially know that the law has changed, and if there is something in place to work on that, I'd love a better idea. I think if I look under line 2.2, I see $36,000 in fiscal year 25 from the general fund for the creation of or oversight of this bill if it became law, of this system, I guess, more specifically. But maybe you could speak to that and help us know if there is something in place so that Minnesotans would be informed that they could potentially be guilty of a crime, even though they're the victim. That would be great. I'd love to know what the plan might be.
Representative Herr.
Madam Speaker, Representative Heinzman, and thank you for that question. And I like your suit and button-down shirt today. I usually see you in a vest, so. I think that, I recall I already answered that question. Representative Schultz asked the same questions, and so I guess I'll just repeat what I've already said, is that departments that, just like every other law that we pass, that public should know, just like when we passed the hands-free, you can't talk on your phone anymore. There's no, the departments in which then are responsible for overseeing these laws, they're the ones that are responsible for ensuring that the public is aware. And so the money that was appropriated was specifically to being able to create a supplemental report in the NIBR system, in which then reported lost and stolen firearms will go into that system so that it gets reported to the FBI. And so, that's just for that reporting. It's not for education. I did specifically ask BCA and DPS how to ensure that law enforcement themselves are aware of this change, and they said that they do training and they work with law enforcement all the time, and it'll just be part of their information that they will be providing for law enforcement. And so that's the same answer I gave Representative Schultz, and that's the answer for you as well.
Representative Heinzman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Would Representative Schultz yield to a question?
She will. Representative Heinzman.
Representative Schultz, Madam Speaker.
He will. Representative Heinzman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Schultz, I think this, as it was mentioned, came up earlier, and I think you might have had a few other comments to share on that. Could you go ahead and do that for the body?
Representative Heinzman, the structure of your question suggests that you are engaged in dilatory tactics. And so you might want to ask a question that's less structured to appear to be overtly engaged in dilatory tactics. Representative Heinzman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So I'll just ask again. Representative Schultz, earlier, I think there was a discussion about this issue of how this information is going to be disseminated or not, should this bill become law. Could you please elaborate on that?
Representative Schultz.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, Representative Heinzman. The answer to your question, Representative Heinzman, is actually quite simple. But before we get exactly to that, let me just mention that in our discussion tonight, a few things that we've learned is that according to this bill and according to federal law, there is nothing that will notify law-abiding gun owners about a change to this. The only protection, which shouldn't come as a surprise to you and I, Representative Heinzman, the only protection, the only amount of funding is funding that goes for government. More government. But the government isn't going to notify any gun owner. Any law-abiding gun owner will not be notified. So, and what I mentioned a little bit earlier tonight is that Minnesotans, we wish that they tuned in a little bit more to us. And not many Minnesotans, not enough Minnesotans, have visited the House website. And so on August 1st, when they post all of the new laws that are passed, it's not going to include, or that might be the only place that it is included that shares that this is a new law that is potentially on the books. And so what we have here is another unfunded mandate that's unaffordable and irresponsible, but especially irresponsible because Minnesotans, law-abiding Minnesotans, won't be notified, won't be given a brief as to this new piece of legislation that's going to impact them, which could result in them being criminalized, making them the victim, forcing Minnesotans, law-abiding Minnesotans, to pay, at minimum, $300 for a crime of someone stealing their firearm. And so, frankly, if this bill is going to move forward, if this bill is going to get signed into law, it would be my suggestion that if we're going to be collecting these fines from law-abiding Minnesotans, that at least that money should be going to inform the rest of the law-abiding Minnesotans so we don't end up with more petty misdemeanors and more $300 fines for law-abiding Minnesotans.
Representative Heinzman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Representative Schultz. Representative Herr, I would say that we're friends. We have a great, I think, working relationship here. And I would suggest that this bill is very well intentioned. Unfortunately, as I'm hearing from constituents at home who are tracking this legislation, they're incredibly frustrated. They're letting me know that this isn't a bill that they can get behind, those that are able to devote the time and energy into kind of looking at what we're doing here, or maybe hearing from an organization that's advocating for them and they're reaching out to me. I think this is the wrong approach. I really do. I think that making, as Representative Schultz was saying, and so many other members have spoke tonight, sharing their constituents' concerns on this issue, making the victim potentially a criminal and subject to fines isn't the answer. A $300 fine for someone that may or may not know that this bill, if it should become law, became law, that's really disappointing. We have so many people that are trying hard, and there's a lot of already statutes on the books regulating gun ownership in Minnesota, and here we are adding more rules, more regulation for people that really do care about making sure that they're following statute, that they don't mess up when it comes to gun ownership. They're conscientious, law-abiding people, and here we are in a situation where they've been violated, that they're now potentially going to miss a step, and maybe they don't make it in the 48 hours that's mentioned in this rule, and suddenly they're in a scenario where they're being accused of something. Nobody likes that. Nobody wants to be in that situation, and here we are as members today standing up, many of us saying, no, this isn't the right approach. This is wrong. And there isn't a process, apparently, to provide notification to law-abiding citizens. Hey, watch out if this should happen to you, if you're violated, if someone burgles your home and steals a firearm, or maybe you've found yourself in the scenario that was mentioned a number of times where someone isn't aware that a firearm has been stolen. They're now potentially going to be under penalty of the law for making a mistake as a law-abiding citizen, genuinely trying to follow all of the prescribed rules and regulations that come along with gun ownership. It's a responsibility that we take very seriously as gun owners, and here we are. So I have to speak to that today. I hope that this doesn't survive the new reality that is here in St. Paul with so much change in the last few weeks. I hope that this is one of those things that fall to the side when we can hopefully work together in a bipartisan way to move legislation and get through this session in a orderly manner, because we're coming to the end. And it would be better, I believe, if things like this were either changed so that we're no longer turning law-abiding criminals and, that was a faux pas maybe, law-abiding citizens into criminals. That should go away. We should be working on legislation that we can agree on and we can approach in a bipartisan way. That's just my 2 cents, Representative Herb. Appreciate the time to speak, Madam Speaker.
The member from Sherburne, Representative Novotny.
Madam Speaker, I'm just happy that I didn't immediately follow Representative New Brindley. As we come to the end here, I've been taking a lot of notes, and I say that because I'm glad Representative New Brindley cleared off most of my notes that I thought we should address, marking some of the things that I've heard said in this chamber in the last 3-4 hours. But I'll go back to the original note that I wrote down. You're criminalizing being a victim. And I say that because reasonably should have known. How do you know when something's missing in a puzzle? What used to be here? Now, if you looked out in your yard and you saw a strange car in your yard, you'd say, well, that's unusual, and you would notice that right away. But if you looked out and your car's not there, and maybe you share a car with your kid or something, you might not notice that your car's gone, or it wouldn't occur to you that your kid's upstairs sleeping, so the car should be there. Where's the car? So that's why it's very concerning. You're asking someone to prove a negative. Some of the other things that we find really concerning is the subjectivity of that prosecution. Depending on where you're living or where the offense is being prosecuted is totally subjective. Depending if you're somebody who's got multiple felony convictions, you might not get anything. If you're a high-value target, you might find 4 federal prosecutors brought in from around the states just to make sure that they get the outcome that they want because of the high-value target. Why would those 4 federal prosecutors decide to join something like this? I don't know. Maybe they want a judgeship like the last people that they brought in for federal prosecutors. It's really worth having concern about, that subjectivity. I'm glad that Representative New pointed out, because I've had it up on my computer for the whole time here, about the MPPOA no longer supporting it, that it is neutral. And the last thing I want to talk about, I'll tell a little story. So when 911, Enhanced 911 first came in, it was not a perfect system. And it especially was hard to deal with when there was counties that surround an area that all have the same phone number. And by that I'll say that the city of Princeton has a phone number exchange that starts at 389. Now that 389 phone number went into Sherburne, Mille Lacs, Isani, and Benton County. And it wasn't perfect. Data had to be put in for thousands of residences. And sometimes there were mistakes made. So I get a call one night, I'm working, and the dispatcher gives me a call and says, possible heart 277 something something of County Road 5. And it doesn't matter what the house numbers were, because 277th and County Road 5 is smack dab in the middle of the Sherburne County Wildlife Refuge. I don't need a map, I don't need a computer to tell me that it's smack dab in the middle of the Sherburne County Wildlife Refuge, which means there's not a house for 5 miles from there. And I told the dispatcher, I said, this coming from a landline or cell phone? And they said it's a cell phone. And they confirmed that the address is correct. And I said, well, something's not right. Call them back. Get directions to their house. Dispatcher gets me on the radio a couple minutes later in a very indignant tone, says, they have confirmed that their address is 277, whatever, whatever, County Road 5. I'm starting ambulance. I said, hold on in the ambulance, because you don't want them going the wrong direction. Something's not right. There is no house at that location. Get directions. The dispatcher did it a second time until my sergeant got on and directed them to actually get directions, not confirm the address, and to not start the ambulance until we knew exactly where they were going, because we didn't want them going the wrong direction until they knew exactly where we wanted to get. The dispatcher came back shortly thereafter and meekly said, I have dispatched Isani County to this address, 277 something something in Isani County. Representative Hurd, you said, We didn't offer you anything. We offered you amendments in the committees. We offered you amendments in Ways and Means. We offered you directions to make it better. And one of the ways we could make this better is actually knowing which direction we're going, what problem are we trying to solve that's an actual public safety issue and not a political law. You said you didn't have any numbers, and then you were able to tell me, and I couldn't understand what the percentages that you were saying is. You then said X amount of guns are not reported lost or stolen, which confuses me because earlier you said we didn't know and we didn't have the data. I've been doing my private data searches as I had done before. I can't find your numbers, but you can't tell me which ones are lost or stolen, but then you can tell me definitively how many are lost and stolen and not reported. I don't even know which way to go with that, so I'll let that drop. The problem with this bill is just like everything else that's gone on, it's slowly boiling the frog. You slowly turn up the temperature. You've got the immunity for not reporting if you report it, but you don't store it properly. I don't know what that back door is. I believe, as Representative Whitty pointed out, I had that as one of the things I wanted to talk about, how that's just going to be a backdoor excuse for the criminals that should they have someone buy a gun illegally for them, like we saw recently, this is their backdoor excuse for that. And then they've got cover. Members, we should know where we're going and where we really want to end up before we start going anywhere. Let's take some time, let's get this right. Let's vote this bill down until we can really find out what'll make a difference in the state of Minnesota and really affect public safety. If you really want the public to be safe, let's do it in a way that makes that difference. And that is all I have. Thank you, Madam.
The member from Ramsey, Representative Moeller.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Representative Herr, for bringing this really important bill. Thank you for the robust discussion tonight, and I think it's important to talk about many of the things that have been said tonight that are inaccurate and to clarify the record. First of all, as Representative Herr, you mentioned that we're talking about a petty misdemeanor. We've heard the word criminalization over and over again tonight. A petty misdemeanor is not a crime, and I will read to you the petty misdemeanor definition. A petty misdemeanor means a petty offense which is prohibited by statute, which does not constitute a crime, and for which a sentence of a fine of not more than $300 may be imposed. So it's also not a straight up $300 fee. That is the top of the limit. Also was incorrectly stated that there really was no standard for proof here because it's not in the bill, but the standard of proof is going to be beyond a reasonable doubt. So it's a high standard, and that is a higher standard than the ERPOs that was mentioned previously. Also, it was a lot of discussion about county attorneys today. Petty misdemeanors are handled by city attorneys. County attorneys don't have jurisdiction over petty misdemeanors. Typically, county attorneys have jurisdiction over felonies, so this is going to be a city attorney situation. We also heard criticism saying, well, this bill doesn't do anything for the person who's stealing the gun. We're not doing anything about that because that's already a crime, and it's a pretty severe crime at that. Under statute 60952, which is theft, and 60953, which is receiving stolen property, I'd like to read that one to you. Any person who receives, possesses, transfers, buys, or conceals any stolen property or property obtained by robbery, knowing or having reason to know the property was stolen or obtained by robbery, may be sentenced in accordance with the provision that is up to not more than 20 years or to payment of a fine of not more than $100,000 or both if the property is a firearm. So it is already a crime, rest assured everybody, and it is a pretty substantial crime at that. Speaking of the reason to know standard and that language that's in the bill, we have that in several other statutes already. The reasonably should have known, that language is in a statute related to physically helpless victims of sexual assault. That was a statute that we all worked on a couple of years recently. It's also in a statute related to dissemination of personal information about law enforcement, whether the person reasonably knows who's disseminating that. And interestingly enough, in the two other gun bills that are on the agenda tonight, including the GOP amendment on those bills, there is the no or reason to know standard in those very amendments that the GOP is offering tonight. So that is not a new standard. It is something that we have been using in law before and are continuing to use. Regarding the immunity provision, I don't know why there's so much confusion about that. It is clearly stated in the bill language that the immunity for someone reporting, if they didn't have their firearms secured properly, the immunity is for storage. It's not for straw purchasing. So just to be clear, this bill does not provide immunity for straw purchasers. Next, we heard about how this bill doesn't do anything about crime, and I think we heard from a newer member who said we're just not doing anything about public safety anymore, and that just simply isn't true. Last year, we passed a bill for switches. Switches were brought up earlier. Those are the devices that turn guns into fully automatic, although apparently not all the devices. We'll talk about that later. But we increased the penalties for switches to make those a presumptive prison commit. We addressed the crimes of catalytic converter theft, organized retail theft, fentanyl dealing, and carjacking. We also know that we have to work on preventing crime and rehabilitating people. If we want to talk about a broken criminal justice system, it's because we're not actually correcting behavior. We need to rehabilitate people, and we also need to prevent behavior before it happens. We have done a lot of that last year. Let's see, what else? Oh, data on prosecution. I have a little data on prosecutors because that, we like to hear about that frequently. We have data from the Minnesota Sentencing Guidelines. And for fiscal year 2023, prosecutors charged 96% of the cases in which defendants allegedly possessed or used firearms. That was a 14% increase in the cases county attorneys handled. We also know that in 2022, 16,259 people were sentenced for a felony offense in Minnesota, which is a 13% increase from 2021 and a 41% increase over 2020. So people are being prosecuted. Again, our problems really lie in what are we doing to prevent crime and rehabilitate folks. I'm just going to pause. I have a lot of notes. I've been waiting all night. I also want to just say that we're really building on the great work that we did with gun violence prevention last year with the switches, increased penalty that I mentioned already, the violence prevention funding that we invested in, the criminal background checks, and the extreme risk protection orders. And I'll say that there was some law enforcement last year that was skeptical of the extreme risk protection orders. And that bill went into effect in January. As of February, I believe that we had 18 cases already filed. I'm hearing now that it might be over 30. 14 of those were by law enforcement agency, including those in greater Minnesota. And one of the interesting quotes that I found was from the general counsel for the Minnesota Sheriff's Association, who says, the data shows that, again, have not vetted the accuracy of the data, he said, but it does show a statistically significant saving of lives according to their research. Some of the concerns that were relayed around that bill and about ex-spouses and others just have not panned out. And so most of those petitions at the time of this report on CARE 11 was filed by law enforcement. So that bill saved lives, this bill will save lives, the other bills that we're working on for gun violence prevention will save lives. And for all of those reasons, Madam Speaker and members, I strongly recommend a green vote. Thank you.
The member from Stearns, Representative Demuth.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And we have had a robust conversation on this bill, and it looks like we'll have more discussion on other bills coming up. But members, I just want to correct a little bit here. This bill does criminalize victims of theft. There's no getting around it. If you have your firearm stolen and you don't go ahead and report that within that arbitrary deadline of 48 hours, you are now a criminal. There will be fines, and they escalate. The other thing I want to make sure everyone knows in this body is county attorneys do prosecute gun crimes. They should do a little bit more of that, but especially where there's not a city attorney. Then it's the county attorneys. So this will affect the work that they do. Again, all this does is it penalizes law-abiding gun owners. That's all this will do. Will it make it safer in Minnesota? It's nice to think that it would, but I highly doubt that. Criminals, as you know, we have talked about in this body multiple times. We can pass all the laws that we want, and criminals in Minnesota do not follow them. It doesn't change their behavior. They will not follow another law that we put in the books. Again, this is an arbitrary time limit that the crime victim would have to follow. And again, as you heard from my colleagues, we don't do this for any other crime victim. Why would we do it for this? Instead of criminalizing the victims of crime, we should actually be prosecuting those criminals, making sure that they know if they break the law, even here in Minnesota, that we will hold them accountable. Members, this is a bad bill. We should, at a minimum, have adopted Representative Engen's task force amendment to make sure that we had all of the information before we jump straight into punishing gun owners. But unfortunately, you all voted no. We should have adopted Representative Hudson's amendment to make sure that we punish criminals who are arrested while in possession of a lost or stolen firearm. But instead of punishing the victims of the crime who had their firearms stolen, that's all we're doing. So unfortunately, on Representative Hudson's amendment that would have made this better, you all voted no. It is time to say no on this bill. We do not need to turn victims of crime into criminals because they missed as we heard, a very random deadline. Members, please join me in voting no on House File 601.
The member from Ramsey, the author of the bill, Representative Herr.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, members, for a robust conversation tonight. Representative Moeller actually shared a lot of the things I was already going to talk about, but I will just maybe be quick and address two things, is that I heard a lot about criminalizing victims, and it doesn't matter how many times we say that across the aisle, it does not criminalize victims. It is in statute that it is not a crime. And that we talked about how people needed to feel safe within their homes, and that we were trying to removing people's Second Amendment rights, which this bill does not do. That people can still have firearms in their homes if they don't feel safe to protect themselves. You can still do that. This bill doesn't impact any of these things that have been said. And the last thing I'll just address is that we talked about this vague language. I think this might have been the one thing that maybe we didn't, Representative Moeller might not have talked on, but like the vague language that we keep talking about, that in the criminal code, it's actually used quite often, the should reasonably know. I know we kept saying, how can we put something like this in statute? And how can we, like, who's gonna be able to interpret this? Well, it's already being done, don't worry. Our state is very smart. It's already in statute. It's in statute multiple times. And so that reason we should have known is already there. And I think that it was really great that Representative Whitty actually brought up the fact of like what happens when law enforcement, when he played the game of the what if games. Well, actually in two pieces of the criminal code, there is one, the language around fleeing officers and around death and bodily injuries to officers. It actually has two pieces in there that talk about should reasonably know. And so you all should be rest rest assured that that language is already there. We've been interpreting it for a long time, and we know how to do it. And so we shouldn't be worried about this vague language. So with that, members, please vote for this bill. It is common sense gun laws, and really this isn't about, we've been talking about criminals a lot. This is really about gun violence prevention measures. This is a reasonable gun violence prevention measure. Please vote green. Thank you.
The clerk will take the roll on the bill. Will the clerk please call the names of the members who are participating remotely?
Becker Finn.
Becker Finn, aye.
Becker Finn, aye. Carroll.
Here you go.
Carroll, yes.
Carroll, aye. Cagle. Vang.
Vang, aye.
Vang, aye. Cagle.
This mic isn't on. No. All right, sorry.
Cagle.
Cagle, aye.
Cagle, aye.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 68 ayes and 63 noes, the bill is passed and its title agreed to.